The story begins in the year 2035, where advances in technology have created a metaverse called Connect. It was practically no different from the real world, and all the NPCs were as if alive, indistinguishable from real people. The player could master any martial arts skills or gain magical abilities. Such opportunities attracted hundreds of millions of people to the world of Connecta, who were eager to fight. And now a huge crowd of warriors lined up in front of Bae Do-hyun, nicknamed Crusher, who fought alone. Looking at several fallen comrades, they did not retreat, deciding to continue attacking him. The guy in the black cloak was not afraid and remained standing in place, preparing for a new battle. One of them wished death on the enemy of the Empire, after which several people attacked him simultaneously. Do-hyun was ranked 13th in Connect, and his class was Psychokinetic, which allowed him to manipulate objects without touching them. It was enough for him to just wave his hands slightly to push the attackers away from him. Meanwhile, those standing to the side fired a volley of arrows aiming at Do-hyun. Seeing the arrows above him, the guy raised his hand, thereby stopping them right in front of him. The arrows hung in the air, then turned around and began to fly back, but few managed to dodge them. Meanwhile, Do-hyun grabbed the dagger and then rushed into the attack, taking advantage of his opponent's hesitation. He destroyed the warriors one by one and then slowly moved towards the next ones. Everyone was shocked by the overwhelming power of telekinesis, and then watched as a pile of weapons flew up into the air. With one wave of his hand, the boy directed swords, spears, and axes towards the knights to deal with them in one fell swoop. When everyone was defeated, Do-hyun left a trail of blood behind him as he made his way inside the building. He came here on a mission to find something, when he suddenly noticed a priest who was barely alive. The boy noticed a pendant on his chest, finding what he was looking for while the priest was speaking about the prophecy of where the Savior would reveal his face. He grabbed Do-hyun's hand, wanting to know only where they were. Who would stop these endless wars? He demanded answers from the stranger. Why did he bring chaos to this world? Why did he burn cities, kill innocents, and enslave their people? Having torn the pendant off him, the guy asked that the blame not be placed on him, but on the guilds working for the government. At that very moment, he heard voices behind him and realized that reinforcements had arrived. On the threshold of death, the priest asked him to remember that everything would be as God intended, and he would pay for his actions. However, Do-hyun ignored his words, reaching the ark that had a slot for the key. The boy held up the torn pendant, causing the lid to open with the help of magic. Suddenly, the ark began to move, revealing a staircase leading deep down before the man. According to the data, the first mythical artifacts of Connect that Do-hyun managed to find are kept here. 5 years ago, the major guilds made a pact with the Empire and destroyed this world to the ground. The old man's lamentations were nothing compared to what he had to go through over the last 6 months. The guilds took control of Connect, leaving him as the only solo player in the top 100. Now he decided to take everything and run away. Other guilds will be angry if they find out that he took them first. As Do-hyun was about to leave, he suddenly stopped, noticing a strange thing lying on the ground. It was a fairly old game cartridge, and it was unclear how it had ended up there. But as soon as the guy took it in his hand, his body was pierced by a terrible pain, similar to an electric shock. Do-hyun tried, through the pain, to understand what was happening and why the connection error occurred. When he woke up in the real world, he realized that someone had stabbed him with a knife and ordered him not to move. The guy cursed under his breath, realizing why things had been going too smoothly up until this point. In front of him stood several men in suits, members of the guild who had gone too far. One of them called the president, asking if he needed to be delivered alive. When he hung up, he announced to the others that the boss had told them to kill him and bring him his head. The men immediately grabbed him tightly, hinting that it was in vain that he had climbed to another level alone. At first he thought he was cool and thought he was playing well, but now he was trembling with fear and begging for mercy. Suddenly, they put a bag over his head so that he wouldn't know when the end would come. When the knife reached its target, darkness fell, and Do-hyun only thought that he was killed because of the game, and now he would die. But some voice called to its master, demanding that he wake up. After which, the guy suddenly jumped up in bed. Screaming loudly, he began to examine his body for wounds. But everything was fine, although he was sure that he had been stabbed. Suddenly he noticed the maid, who was sitting on his knees and asking how he was feeling. The guy was stunned that he was called Raoul, and there was a status window hanging above the girl. Her name was Anna, she was level 3, and now she was saying that he was covered in cold sweat while he was sleeping. The guy immediately went to the status window, feeling as if he had been given access to classified information. The notification stated that the soul transfer was successful, and the user interface was available. Looking out the window, Raul realized in shock that he had entered the world of Connect, and his soul had been transferred into the body of a non-player character. Without wasting any time, he ran out onto the balcony to see where he was, and immediately felt something. All his senses seemed to be heightened. In the Crusher's body, the sensations were completely different. Due to synchronization, the player's strength depends on the level of connection to Connect. Usually, synchronization doesn't exceed 30%, but Do-hyun merged with the character by as much as 90%. He managed to hold the top spot in Connect's rankings for a year until guilds appeared. He spent so much time getting into such physical shape, and then he ruined it all. The notification mentioned a closed beta version and the number of users, meaning he was the only one logged in. He still has access to the old inventory, and the information was currently being scanned. Hidden user data was discovered, causing updates to be downloaded. With the knowledge and powers he gained in his past life, he will become number 1 again. His name is Raoul Ashton, the youngest son of the 5th Earl of the soon-to-fall Kingdom of Reuben. The guy grabbed his head, trying to digest all the information that had suddenly fallen on him. The Ashton family were orthodox. The Earl and his eldest son died suddenly, and the middle one disappeared without a trace. When the younger one inherited the throne, a coup occurred. At the same time, the barrier collapsed, releasing the monsters. The residents fought, but they were unable to fight back. And now Do-hyun found himself in the body of that very Raoul. And this beautiful city before his eyes will be completely destroyed in 3 years. The guy decided that he would not allow this. Do-hyun and the Crusher were in the past. Now this was his new life. In the past, a sad end awaited him. But if he misses a second chance, he will never forgive himself. There is only one way to prevent the county from collapsing, and that is by making it stronger. In a month, there will be a traditional coming-of-age ceremony, which he is obliged to attend. If he makes it to the semifinals, he will be able to enroll in the Royal Academy, where training will restore his previous form. Only in this case will Raoul be able to protect himself and his kingdom, which was on the brink of collapse. But when he swung the ball twice, it was the same one who fell, realizing that this body was incredibly weak. The guy noticed that he was level 5, and he was not far from the maid, who was level 3. He sighed heavily and realized that he needed to start preparing for the tournament immediately and raise his level. A month later, on the day of the tournament, Raoul walked among the crowd of warriors who were also taking part in it. He would have to fight these brutes, and he remembered how mercilessly he had trained for this. It took a lot of effort to get to the qualifying rounds, but the journey was made. The last time Raoul looked at the status window, he was level 13 and had managed to increase his stamina. But on top of everything else, he has a backup plan that he will use at the right moment. Just when he thought he had to reach the semifinals, he felt an attack from behind. Having dodged, the boy noticed the man, who justified himself by saying that his hand had slipped. Dion and his cousins were surprised that the noble aristocrat decided to take part in the tournament. He was the middle son of Viscount Austin, Raoul's uncle, that is, his cousin. He always picked on Raoul during martial arts classes and never showed mercy. However, the mentor and the count did not interfere, adhering to the family charter. So this guy can pester the younger ones as much as he wants, and now he was doing the same. Dion urged Raoul to get out of here before it was too late, because this time he wouldn't get away with a fracture. He then turned to his cousins, urging them to let the boy through. It was time for him to cry into his pillow. Many people think that Dion will be the winner of the tournament, but Raoul will leave him smashed in the final. Towards the evening, the butler reported to the master that the countdown had begun from the first day of the competition. The count was curious to see if anyone had distinguished themselves. Then he picked up the list and was surprised. When asked where Raoul was now, the butler replied that the master had eaten and was now resting in his chambers. He needs to regain his strength after such an intense qualifying round. Count Melvin Ashton, Raoul's father, dismissed the butler, wanting to think it all over in private. As soon as the servant left the office, the man laughed loudly, praising his son. Looking at the list, he still couldn't believe that the guy had made it, and made it to the group stage. He was always the weakest of the sons, so he did not insist that he learn swordsmanship. But suddenly, a month before the start of the tournament, he began to practice, showing amazing results. The first training session turned out to be a complete failure, but this did not break him. On the contrary, It gave him strength. The Count knew that Raoul was being mocked and ridiculed, called a weakling, but he should not have interfered. He was afraid of making the situation worse by putting him in an awkward position, and was waiting for the moment when he could stand up for himself. But now his son has surpassed all his expectations and has begun to look like a man. When the tournament came to an end, Melvin decided to make sure to talk to him about his future. When the day of the final competition arrived, the arena was filled with spectators eagerly awaiting the fight. However, some were not so happy, complaining that it could hardly be called a battle. The green-haired man was called upon to finish off his opponent, but it turned out to be more difficult than he thought. He didn't understand why Raoul was still standing on his feet, even though he had already received many injuries. However, he decided not to retreat and continued to attack Raoul, who could only defend himself from the sword blows. The warrior gathered all his strength and called on the guy to surrender, throwing him away from himself a couple of meters. The enemy began to insult him, being confident that he would not be able to run away forever. Waving his sword, he continued his provocations, saying that the offspring of noble families did not behave like that. Fighting off another blow, Raoul suggested that he watch his language during the fight. Meanwhile, the spectators continued to call on Edmund to finish him off, since money was bet on him. Unable to bear it any longer, the warrior decided it was time to call it a day. After which, he began to release energy from the sword. The audience was stunned by the use of the mana sword, after which they began to advise Raoul to save himself. Edmund rushed forward at him, but the boy remained standing in place, gripping the sword tighter. Everyone was wondering why he wasn't dodging, when suddenly a deafening explosion was heard in the arena. When the cloud of dust cleared, the judge stood between them, declaring that the competition was over. To everyone's surprise, Raoul emerged victorious, and the spectators called the fight amazing. However, Edmund began to object with displeasure, and asked why they chose Raoul and not him. The warrior shouted that they shouldn't have stopped him, but the judge immediately called him a fool. The referee asked him to look at his neck, and he was forced to stop the fight. Otherwise, Edmund would already be dead. The stunned warrior realized that all this time Raoul had been aiming at his neck, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly he was overcome with fear, and a cold sweat ran through his body as his legs stopped responding to him, and he fell to the ground. At that very moment, Raoul approached him, declaring that he would be punished for insulting Ashton County. Towards evening, when the competition was over, the boy went to his chambers, and the maid wished him a good rest. His face was stern, but as soon as the door closed behind him, Raoul immediately lit up with happiness. He immediately opened the status window, noticing that he had improved his swordsmanship skill, reaching level 9 of the novice rank. His plan worked perfectly, but he was only able to use it during the battle with Edmund. The guy took advantage of the game's features and gained experience and skill points by fighting stronger opponents. The longer the battle went on, the more points he earned, forcing him to defend himself all the time. And all this is thanks to the experience multipliers that he uses in exchange for the ability to respawn because he plays in hardcore mode. More risk means more gain, although at first, Raoul was not very happy about it. But now, everything has changed. If it weren't for hardcore, he wouldn't have been able to achieve such results in a month. But what he's most pleased with is the 5 unique characteristics. Telekinesis is an ability that Do Hyun possessed, and Noble Blood is Raoul's specialty. The remaining 3 will unlock as he levels up, but for now, he'll only use what he has. At the following competitions, the guy emerged victorious each time, gradually raising his level. Finally, after several fights, the judge announced that the younger Ashton had reached the finals. The audience decided that he was just lucky, and also thought that he was cheating, although this is impossible. In fact, the residents of Connect have no idea about the existence and abilities that players possess. Therefore, he decided that it was better not to use telekinesis now, unless absolutely necessary. Recalling one of the battles, Raoul thought contentedly that his acting talent was not wasted. He was brought out of his thoughts by a knock on the door. It was Ivan, the butler, asking permission to enter his chambers. He inquired about the gentleman's health, but he was perfectly fine, because if he got hurt, he would call a doctor or a priest. Putting his hand on his shoulder, the man advised him to be more vigilant, because his opponent was only getting stronger. He must also remember that not every wound can be healed by healers. Raoul was pleased that Ivan sincerely cared about him. This was unusual, because in his past life, he was on his own. After this, the butler handed him a piece of paper, fulfilling the master's recent request. Holding the information in his hands, the guy was confident that he would definitely win. Ivan bowed, after which you decided to leave. The boy reminded the butler of Mr. Melvin at his age. Here, too, he was a self-confident young man. But this time, His opponent will be Sir Dion, who spares no one who stands in his way. Meanwhile, Raoul looked closely at the sheet of paper, wondering how much money was there. Ashton County has a betting system in place, created specifically to promote the tournament, and a portion of the money collected goes to the participants themselves, which should be enough to become a worthy member of the Count's family. All that remained was to defeat Dion, and the next day, he had this opportunity. The final fight begins, during which the spectators unexpectedly begin to support Raoul. Dion didn't know how he managed to reach the final, but he would make him believe that signing up for the tournament was a bad idea. The smug guy was sure that soon his fans would notice how pathetic Raoul was. The warrior couldn't wait to crawl on the ground, coughing up lungs and whining in pain. At that very moment, contrary to his words, Raoul began to yawn demonstratively, pretending that he didn't care. This action made Dion angry, causing mana to start escaping from his body. He pretended to be cool, but his potential was practically zero. He makes a strong impression, but it's just a show. When the referee announced the start of the contest, Dion was the first to rush forward, promising to finish off his opponent. However, Raoul was faster, which is why he tried to strike first, but his opponent immediately covered himself with a sword. The first blow was Raoul's, and Dion was thrown several meters away from him. The first thing the guy thought was that he wasn't as quick as he seemed, and his strength wasn't at all worthy of attention. He could clearly see the trajectory of his sword, so there was no way Dion could hit the guy. By tripping him, Raoul realized that he had sword skills, but lacked practice. It was hard to believe that this man had been bullying him all this time, even though he was nothing special. Meanwhile, Dion rose to his feet, gripping his weapon tightly, and promised that now it was definitely the end for him. Using the mana flowing through his body, he is able to charge his sword, but that is where his knowledge ends. The spectators watched in shock as Raoul swung his sword sharply, knocking the weapon out of his opponent's hands. With a stern look, Raoul declared that Dion was a worthless person, which finally finished him off. The disgruntled opponent wanted to attack him with his bare hands, but the guy tripped him up again. As he fell, Raoul explained that he had anger management issues and had already fallen for the same trick twice. Now Dion was directly prophesying the glorious name of Viscount Austen, making a laughingstock of himself. However, shocked spectators couldn't believe that Dion lost without making a single successful attack. Raoul turned to the judge, reminding him about the announcement of the winner, because he was as shocked as the others. The man immediately came to his senses and announced that the winner of the coming-of-age tournament was Raoul Ashton. People immediately started chanting Raoul's name, while some did not believe in the victory of this weakling. The guy was happy with the victory, but his useless endurance shook him and made him fall to the ground. While the judge was calling the doctor, Raoul noticed a notification about the completed task and the reward for it. The rewards were quite generous, and besides, he will now be able to get into the Royal Academy. Meanwhile, Ivan, who was standing next to Melvin, said that he was very proud of the young master. In just a month, he achieved great success, which made the Count think seriously. For him, the battle with Dion was nothing more than a game. If he advanced so far in such a short time, then he is a real genius. Raoul noticed that his father had seen everything, and therefore hoped that he was convinced that the boy was worthy of studying at the academy. However, towards the evening, the dissatisfied Count categorically ruled out this possibility. Raoul couldn't understand his thoughts, because he had made it to the top 4, and even won the tournament. However, Melvin stated that this was not up for discussion, as he had concluded that it was too early for him to leave his father's house. He almost passed out, so it's better for him to stay and recover after the tournament. Raoul was dissatisfied and repeated his father's words that mastery of the sword is learned throughout life. This is exactly what he wants, to improve and learn new things, so even he can't stop him. The Count looked at his son in shock, then smiled, thinking that he had really grown up. Suddenly the man stood up, drawing his weapon, deciding to let him go if Raoul could defeat him. Melvin was adamant in his decision and immediately pointed the gun at the guy. He decided not to be cautious with his son, who was shocked by such a proposal. A month later, about 100 knights followed the carriage in which Raoul was located. The boy could hardly believe that his father had finally let him go and was able to fulfill his promise. He remembered that when his father challenged him, he immediately accepted it, preparing for a fight. They crossed their blades, but Melvin only egged him on, that this was all he could do. However, the man decided to fight with full force, offering to see the true art of swordsmanship. One blow threw Raoul back several meters, after which he immediately lost consciousness. Then his father showed him only a drop of his power, but he clearly knew that this was not so. After all, when the war began, the powerful Lord Melvin died, unable to resist the enemy. His county is rapidly collapsing, and to avoid this, his father must survive. He must live up to his expectations, since he finally allowed him to leave the estate. The guy decided to become stronger and protect his family, without losing what was dear to him. Meanwhile, Melvin recalled the countless times his son tried to resist him. The guy could barely stand on his feet, but he could still hold the sword in his hands, not wanting to give up at any cost. His tenacity was commendable, as that is what all Ashton men do. The next moment they rushed at each other again, wanting to decide everything in this battle. But as Raoul got closer, the man was surprised to notice that the trajectory of his sword had changed. Even using telekinesis, the guy was only able to scratch him slightly, but that was already an achievement. The Count thought it was a matter of time before Raoul would become a man, and everyone would recognize him as a great swordsman. So, later in the evening, Raoul and the other soldiers decided to take a break to rest. Without wasting time, the guy decided to ask Sir Philip how much time they had left until their final destination. The High Knight explained that it would take them 5 days, but if you wished, they could quicken their pace. Rowley decided to give up on this idea and continue in the same spirit, because it was good training for soldiers. Apart from him and his servants, his father allowed him to take 50 men with him to guard him. Of these, 3 were ordinary knights, 6 were mentors, 15 were apprentices, and 20 were cavalrymen, each of whom had reached potential at level B or higher. The number and condition of other skills are also normal, but they will have to sweat to prevent the fall of the county. At that very moment, Jake informed him that the cart with the luggage was ready and they could leave at any moment. Some doubted that they needed to travel in such a large group for a whole month, but decided not to argue. With a smile, he decided to circle everything when they got to the place, thereby puzzling his comrades. He was talking about the free city of Mira, one of the first cities players are sent to after the tutorial mission respawns. Here he will find mini quests and hidden artifacts, as well as restrictions on the use of mana to avoid violence. Mira's resources are endless, so players love this place because they can get a lot of valuable things there. There is also the God's Domain, a territory where you can kill monsters as much as your heart desires. This is exactly the place Raoul wants to show his fighters. His goal is to improve their skill level as quickly as possible. In his opinion, it was the perfect plan, and as soon as he arrived in Mira, the next task immediately appeared. He thought that no more options would be available to him until the official launch of the game, but he could get even more. While the boy was riding in the carriage, Jake approached him, announcing that the mayor was ready to receive him right away. The mayor of the free city was named Reynaldo. He was thin of build, with a perpetually curious look. He was immediately informed that the youngest son of the Earl of Ashton had arrived, and that another 50 people had decided to visit their city. The mayor decided that the boy wanted to take in the sights, so he asked to be let in. The Ashton family makes good money selling monster products, so meeting them could be useful. As soon as Raoul arrived to see him, the man immediately smiled, kindly inviting him to his city. The guy shook his hand and thanked him, although he thought the man looked like a lying scoundrel. Without wasting any time, Raoul tried to explain that they had a suitable place for training. Ronaldo assumed he meant the city's safe zone, but the boy immediately interrupted him. He was specifically interested in the Cursed Forest, which he would like to visit with his permission as soon as possible. The mayor immediately began to dissuade him, explaining that the topic was too dangerous for young gentlemen like him. With a heavy sigh, Raoul realized that he had no choice but to throw away 500,000 gold. He intended to give them to the mayor in gratitude for such a warm welcome, but it was all in vain. As soon as the man heard the amount, he immediately grabbed the guy by the hands and announced that he was just joking. The mayor, delighted with the money, immediately began to encourage him to visit, allowing him to go there right away. Raoul realized that everything had gone according to plan, after which he thanked him for his generosity. And now it's time to hunt monsters to soon find yourself at the top of Connect. The world was supposed to be home to Connect players, but since it's a closed beta, it's currently empty. There is only one player here, Raoul. So this is a time of crisis for Mira. No one can appreciate the wide range of amenities, accommodations, trading stalls, and guild housing opportunities. For the same reason, the price of land dropped significantly, which looked very tempting. However, The true purpose of his arrival here lies in the desire to purchase real estate. If he buys the lands of the world now, it will open up a huge number of opportunities for him. Sooner or later, luxurious mansions for aristocrats can be built on them. As well as guild houses and housing for ordinary players, the value of these lands will increase hundreds of times in the future. When players appear and the war begins, Mira, a city blessed by God, will become the perfect place to hide. Previously, it was possible to lease out land and thereby earn a living. But now, this is not enough. Raoul must be fully armed, calculate all the risks, and prepare for war. In his past life, he was unable to resist the financial prowess of the vile guilds that had taken the reins of power into their own hands. Sometime later, Jake asked again in surprise if he should just sign his name. An irritated Raoul shouted loudly that everyone had already signed long ago and were only waiting for him. However, the knight countered this by saying that his mother had told him to be careful when signing papers. When everything was over, the girl confirmed the creation and registration of the first guild in this city. It consists of Sir Raoul and 50 other people. And after the papers were signed, everything went smoothly. The guy formed the very first and most progressive guild in the world without players, and called it the First Guild. Now everyone who is part of it has the right to support the system, and soon the confusion on their faces will be replaced by inspiration. After this, Raoul decided to visit the Mira Combat Association branch. The girl behind the counter greeted them, asking how she could help them. Raoul was primarily interested in how high-ranked their skill books were. The skill book is a collection of skills of varying difficulty. If you read carefully, you can expand your range of possibilities. Without wasting any time, the guy began to find out what it took to become one, and decided to skip the low-ranking books. He could contribute to the association by completing tasks or making a certain number of purchases. However, he was warned that he would have to spend a lot of money to do this, but Raoul was ready for it. The surprised girl announced the sum of 10,000 gold, doubting that he had that kind of money. But, seeing the money, the girl's expression immediately changed, offering him her help in finding the necessary books. Raoul decided not to waste time on trifles, and so he smiled sweetly, declaring that he would take everything they had. Sometime later, Jake complained that it was very difficult for him to carry so many books. They may seem useless to them now, but later they will play a big role in perfecting their craft. I had no doubt about their value. I was just curious whether it was more effective or reading practical experience. Philip asked himself the same question, but the gentleman decided to tell them everything tomorrow. While in his room, looking at the huge stacks of books, the guy thought that he had gone a little too far. There is a limit to the number of skills a player can have, and it is unlikely that they will be able to use all of them at once. Then he opened the quest window, remembering that when he woke up in this body, there were 2 unknown items in his inventory. For some time he tried to lift it, to see what it could be, because he couldn't press it or use it. But yesterday, when he received the assignment, they were open, but he did not have time to check it. When Raoul opened his inventory, he was pleasantly surprised to find out which items were locked. One of them turned out to be skill dex, and perhaps he will be able to activate it by completing the current task. The goal of the task was to collect at least 10 skill books and add them to the skill dex. Raoul immediately grabbed the magic book, then brought the skill book to her, watching what was happening in surprise. As soon as skill dex absorbed the skills from the book, the boy joyfully shouted that everything worked. But he would spend forever digging around with the rest of the books, and he had to figure out how to bring in all the books at once. As if reading his thoughts, all the books immediately soared into the air and began to give their energy to skill dex. The guy was stunned that the system understood him, but in the end, everything worked out for him even faster than he expected. Skill dex was activated, giving him the skill collector stat and the mimic skill. Looking through the skill descriptions, Raoul was shocked that thanks to the copycat, he could steal his opponent's skills. Reading the description of skill dex, the guy suddenly realized that this was the very artifact that he found right before his death. Although some characteristics and inventory items from the past life have been preserved, with only 3 EX rank stats and 1 item left in his inventory, he wondered what kind of power was hidden within it. The next day, the military looked at their status window in shock, trying to figure out what was going on. Meanwhile, the butler entered the young master's room and wished him good morning. However, Raoul looked very tired. because he had not been able to close his eyes all night. The guy greeted Bernard half-heartedly, and I wondered if he had briefed the others. The red-haired boy did absolutely everything as he was ordered, obeying the will of his master. After this, Raoul began to ask with interest how he liked the skill book and whether he had studied it. Bernard is a servant of the Ashton family and Ivan's stepson. He taught him everything he knew, and Bernard worked for the good of the county from an early age. He has an excellent memory and high performance skills, but there is another reason why Raoul took him with him. While Bernard thanked him, the boy carefully studied his impressive status window. His basic stats are weak, but his talents make him perfect for the role of a servant or esper. The preparations were finished, and so Raoul decided to check if Bernard was ready. When the long-awaited day arrived, Raoul and his retinue set out into the forest, immediately encountering monsters. For the guy's current level, such monsters turned out to be too slow, and therefore he dealt with it with ease. Such an easy victory only raised his spirits, and he was already ready to fight the next ones. At that very moment, he was surrounded by orcs who noticed the strong man and wanted to kill him. Behind the ordinary orcs stood their leader, whose skin was red, and he called on everyone to attack. When the crowd pounced on Raoul, he remained standing, but was ready to fight. The huge number of enemies was only a plus, and this way, he would be able to level up faster. God's domain is not only a territory for hunting monsters, but also a symbol of Mira. If players get injured, they will be healed, and if they die, they will respawn in the city, so there is no better shelter. Even if you kill any of the monsters, the total number of monsters will remain unchanged because Mira has a blessing on them. People cannot be reborn in the cursed forest, or use items obtained as rewards for hunting monsters outside of it. If you take them out of the forest, they will immediately turn to dust and disappear, as if they had never existed. And all because people are forbidden to touch the property of the gods. This was an important rule. But it only applies to the inhabitants of Mira, which did not apply to some individuals. Players are also allowed to take trophies obtained in battle out of the forest, which is a huge bonus. Jake, who was acting as a porter, thanked the system for such leniency. Philip looked at him with surprise, because he knew that the young master had taken the entire blow upon himself. The orc chieftain, who watched his comrades die, asked the man what this power was. Meanwhile, Raoul looked at him with a smile, using telekinesis to raise the orc's weapons in the air. Having heard no answer to his question, the monster realized that he was not able to resist such an opponent. Once the orc was defeated, Jake happily gave his master a thunderous salute. The blonde was amazed at Raoul's useful abilities, while Philip asked to skin the orc silently. However, they were confused by the long journey to Mira for this, even though they had gained a lot of experience after this training. Meanwhile, Raoul collected the blood of his opponents using telekinesis. Then he thanked his comrades, because only through their joint efforts had they achieved such a result, and now they could become stronger. Philip realized that the master was right, because he remembered how he used a sickle strike against an orc, cutting him in two. It was then that he first used his powers after studying the skill book acquired by Raoul. Now he understood why the master preferred skill books over combat armor. He mastered this skill so quickly it was unclear where the young master got such knowledge. At that very moment, he looked at the notification in surprise, after which he asked Raoul to look at the guild chat. However, he already looked irritated, which meant he had seen everything. After which he ordered them to return to Mira immediately. Meanwhile, in the city, one of Raoul's men lay on the ground, completely defeated. The man standing over him, with a sword in his hands, was sure that this should have been done earlier. It was hard for him to contain himself, watching them, Ashton's kids, do whatever they wanted. At that very moment, another guy pierced the warrior's body, telling his brother that he should have listened to him in the first place. The red-haired man with a smile on his face was sure that they would have put them in their place long ago. Meanwhile, the third brother remembered the words of his great-grandfather, who taught them to be careful and not to cause trouble. These boys were the Viscount's sons, Randall, Ramon, Jerry, and Cale. One of Ashton's warriors, who was still alive, whispered that they would regret this. Ramon, with a wild laugh, advised their master to hurry up so that he could happily talk to him. Suddenly, he noticed that something was wrong here, and these warriors refused to die to the last. They thought that representatives of noble families were forbidden from sending weapons against each other within the territory of a free city. But now they didn't care, because if they were interrogated, they would say that they had nothing to do with it and somehow get out of it. After all, it was a wonderful idea to put an end to the Ashton line now, and perhaps great-grandfather would even praise them. As Ramon was saying this, some unknown force blew up Jerry's head. Turning around, They were surprised to see Raoul, who was beside himself with rage. They have committed a crime against Ashton County, and now there is more at stake than their worthless lives. The eldest son could not believe that Raoul dared to kill a member of the Randall family. Cale immediately started asking loudly where the guards had gone and who had let him in here. One of the guards, Randall, who had a sword to his throat, only now decided to announce that he had found Ashton's squad. The Knights of Vice County Rindle are surrounded, and they will make sure that no townspeople are nearby. Raoul thanked the warriors for their good work, then used telekinesis to lift them into the air. He decided to give them to Bernard so that he could take them to the temple for healing. The boy then opened his inventory to get weapons to fight the Viscount's vile sons. Raoul decided to deal with this trash on his own, not daring to let his comrades down. Rindle, like Ashton, is one of the 5 military families of the Kingdom of Reuben. However, Rindle joined the 4 warrior families when the head of the family, Viscount Hudson, became a sword master. And since they had no special merits, they had to look for other ways to strengthen their status. To make a worthy contribution to the prosperity of the kingdom and destroy dangerous rivals. Their target was the county of Ashton, which had ceased to train renowned swordsmen and had lost its former power. Moreover, the Ashton family could be easily manipulated because they were politically unsavvy. Conflicts and clashes occurred more than once, most often with the Randall family as the instigators. The number of artificial swordsmen in her army left no doubt that she would be the one to win this fight. But suddenly the boy turned around sharply and swung his sword, killing the guard that Philip was holding back. The knight realized that the young master had decided to handle absolutely everything himself, and therefore ordered the swords to be released. Rindle's warriors were surprised that their opponents were sheathing their swords, stupid ones, but it played into their hands. The first to fall for the provocation was Cale, who rushed at Raoul, who decided to fight against them alone. He decided that the guy was just showing off, but with a sharp movement of his sword, he cut him in 2. Ramon was stunned by the death of her second brother, after which she ordered the guards to finish him off. Night Guard Captain Jeremy grabbed his sword, realizing that Raoul had left them no choice. He didn't want to intimidate the 15-year-old boy, but after what he saw, he didn't intend to stand aside. This man had B-rank potential, so he was confident that he could handle the guy. The other guards also drew their weapons, intending to help their captain. Viscount Rindle's primary weapon is the rapier, and Raoul is now dealing with elite knights. At that very second, several guards pointed their blades at the guy, but he didn't even move. The captain was level 65, the others were around 60, Raoul was level 45, and he couldn't beat them in a fair fight. The guards called on him to surrender, not caring that he came from a noble family. But while they were wagging their tongues, the guy suddenly rushed into battle, swinging his sword. The man didn't have time to realize what was happening when Raoul used the bear strike. In a short time, the guy defeated 2 guards, but Jeremy immediately rushed into battle. The guys barely managed to put his sword in front of him to defend themselves from the sudden blow. Jeremy asked the remaining guard if he was okay, but he was perfectly fine. 2 of his elite knights died, even though he heard that the guy was weak and had no idea how to wield a sword. At that very moment, he took out a knife to use as an additional weapon in the fight, thereby hinting at his seriousness. The man realized that the rumors about Raoul were false, and from that moment on, he decided to fight with full force. Noticing the dagger and rapier in his hands, Raoul realized that he had the skill to wield the Rendell meteor sword. Jeremy admired his bravery, but asked him not to forget that Mira is a sacred city that heals any wound. The man was sure that Raoul would not be able to defeat them without help. But the boy was ready to prove them wrong. He's even willing to bet that his knights haven't trained once since arriving in Mira. Jeremy immediately flinched, realizing that the boy was telling the truth. But it was unclear how he knew this. In fact, Raoul noticed that they were healed, and yet they continued to lie on the ground, paralyzed with fear. They were not used to looking death in the eye, and Jeremy immediately realized that this boy was not just familiar with the art of initiating combat. It is as if he sees right through his opponent, which makes him a very dangerous opponent. Now, the man was extremely serious, which is why he asked his friend to cover his back. At that very second, the 2 of them rushed at Raoul, who jumped back, avoiding the attack. But despite his defense, Jeremy was able to inflict many small scratches on him, which should have weakened him. Seeing his condition, the guard immediately rushed forward, deciding that his opponent was exposed. Jeremy realized what was happening and tried to stop him. She was too late, and Raoul caught up with him. When the man was left alone, he realized that he had to act immediately. For a second, he gripped his weapon tighter, deciding to use the meteor to destroy Raoul as quickly as possible. The boy held the sword in front of him, watching the very same powerful skill used in duels. It was damn hard for him to fight back, because even telekinesis couldn't save him in this situation. The guy firmly decided that he had to hold out until the end, which noticeably surprised Jeremy. Now the advantage is clearly on the man's side. He attacks again and again, leaving him no chance to counterattack. However, he was filled with hatred as he continued to look at the arrogant face of this boy. Taking advantage of his hesitation, Raoul knocked the weapon out of his hands, after which he used the impersonator skill. Meanwhile, Jeremy's weapon hovered in the air using telekinesis, not returning to its owner. After this, Raoul pulled the weapon towards himself, deciding to use the man's own technique on him. Swinging his rapier, the boy used Meteor, pointing the blade at his opponent. The man tried to understand where he knew about this skill, but now it was more important for him to defend himself from the attack. Holding his hands out in front of him, Jeremy asked who had trained him and who had betrayed Viscounty Rendell. Meanwhile, Raoul swung his dagger and explained with a smile that he was the very traitor. When the boy pierced the man's body, his synchronization with the Meteor Mastery skill reached 100%. It wasn't easy. He spent a lot of energy using the S-rank impersonator to suppress the opponent. With the help of the impersonator, he can only copy one skill at a time while maintaining his sight on the target at the moment of activation. Otherwise, the analysis percentage will be reset to 0, which is why he didn't blink while he was being attacked, and the skill can only be stolen in a one-on-one fight. At that very second, Raoul opened the skills screen, deciding to check what abilities were available to him. Thanks to Skill Dex, he has access to 3 more skills, and the slots allow him to use any 2 skills from Skill Dex. At that same second, the guy turned his gaze in surprise to the stunned Ramon, who could barely put a sentence together. He tried to find out who Raoul was and how he knew about Viscount Rendell's skill. The guy ordered Philip to kill them over and over again until 1 hour had passed. Once they would respawn. The knight bowed and then gave the same order to his subordinates. Seeing the warriors looming over him, Ramon trembled and began to beg them to spare him. Raoul was sure that earthly rules did not apply here, and the games were over too. This is his new reality, and now he has dealt with the first problem that arose on his path. And he will not waste the chance given to him, even if he has to swim through a sea of blood. Raoul declared to himself that he would never give up, and would only move forward, together with his comrades. Meanwhile, the city's stunned mayor watched the events through a telescope, trying to understand what was happening. According to the plan, Randall's knights were supposed to beat up the brat, and he would get his share by sending the guards to help. But this guy ruined everything for him, taking out 12 fighters in one fell swoop, and remained unharmed. After defeating his opponents, Raoul turned his gaze to the window, behind which the mayor was located. The man became frightened and immediately crouched down, hoping to hide from the angry gaze. Rumor has it that he is nothing special, a weakling who can only boast of his status. However, it could be just a mask, and underneath it lies a great master of the sword. If his guess is correct, then Raoul has long since found out about his machinations and will now want to deal with him. The man exhaled and tried to calm down, deciding that it was necessary to build a trusting relationship with Ashton County. Later in the evening, while in his room, Raoul decided that he had overdone it a little, but the game was worth the candle. He hit the jackpot of 5,000 gold, and thanks to the magic bag with spatial magic, he doesn't have to worry about excess baggage. He also acquired a rapier and a dagger, the main weapons of the knights of the Viscounty of Rendell. But what pleased him most was the ticket for a random skill book that he received for completing the quest. Raoul hoped that this time he would be lucky. Otherwise, he was already tired of unlucky tickets. Before activating it, he asked for a ticket so that it would give him something good. After this, the guy tore up the ticket, which he immediately began to examine in the bright light. At that very moment, a skill book appeared in front of him, the B-rank Riviera Spear Mastery. This was exactly what he needed to leave for the capital, and today, fortune clearly smiled on him. However, there is now one unfinished business left, and the month of preparation must not be wasted. Before going to bed, the guy concluded that now, finally, he could do it. A week later, Raoul was in the forest, fighting the orcs, destroying them one by one. He was able to level up to 51 and was now eligible for a class upgrade. Having fulfilled all the necessary conditions, he received the swordsman class and expert-level psychokinetic. Philip and Jake congratulated the young master, as being an expert swordsman at 15 years old is a rare occurrence. At that very second, the guy raised his hand up, raising a huge number of stones into the air. He then piled them into a mountain and then used a bear strike to cut it down. Raoul had not expected such a powerful return, and now his strength amazed even his comrades. Jake suggested with a smile that now they could rest, but Philip had a different opinion. They will think about rest when they reach the level of skill of a young master, but not before. The blonde decided to justify himself by saying that they were behind the gentleman, as if behind a stone wall. Suddenly, Raoul interrupted their conversation, suggesting that they send a message to Ashton County to please his lordship. He decided to contact him later, but for now, it was necessary to keep their successes a secret, to which everyone immediately agreed. But he crushed quite a few monsters, thereby increasing his skill level, which means everything went according to plan. The guy also threw out some bait so that someone would take the bait, thereby sending a message to the imperial mongrels. Meanwhile, in the city, Nakia, who was an alchemist, was glad that the workday was over. Her potion has been in high demand lately, which has kept her busy. It was all thanks to Ashton County, to which she is very grateful. To create them, you need body parts of monsters, but they are not often found in the cursed forest. But the Knights of County Ashton suddenly kindly offered their help, and now she can brew potions every day. Besides, Raoul is a frequent visitor to her shop. He always asks if she needs anything and asks about the work in general. She was unusual for this kind of attention, but she was still grateful to him, because besides everything else, he was a handsome man. Suddenly, Nakia came to her senses and began to slap herself on the cheeks, because right now she was thinking about something completely different. There is an 8-year difference between them, and he is too young for her, and on top of that, he is an aristocrat. After some time, the girl reached the house, noticing the light inside. Entering the room, she turned to Nikki, announcing that she had returned. But there was no answer. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the bed, where there was a note, pinned to the bed with a knife. It said that they had her sister. If Nakia wanted to save her, you had to keep your mouth shut and wait for further instructions. A cold sweat immediately broke out on the girl's face as she read the terrible message. A few minutes later, Nakia was running down the street in tears, thinking that Nikki couldn't leave the city. She can't go to the city government because the kidnappers are probably watching her, and the guards are unlikely to listen to her. It will take some time for mercenaries and members of the Adventurers Guild to begin searching. Suddenly, the girl remembered Raoul, who asked her to let him know if she got into trouble, because he would always be ready to help her. Now she had no other choice, and she had to find Mr. Raoul immediately. At that, he then gave the order for everyone to take their positions and focus on the target, reporting any changes to the plan. Then the guy entered the Connect community, the Svyaz Cafe. This place was very useful for him. As a star player, he received the information he needed from fans and informants. Gradually, the cafe turned into an information treasure trove, where all of Connect's hidden information was stored. It hasn't disappeared anywhere, but he can't make further plans relying only on his memory. Raoul decided to search for information on the request, Free City of the World, looking through all the available tasks. When suddenly he was told that Nakia had arrived, the guy decided to change her future too, asking him to be nice to her. A crazy alchemist, a bloodthirsty witch, a taboo breaker. People called Nakia many different names because they were terrified of her. Because of her, many civilians suffered in the process of creating chemical weapons, because she conducted experiments on people. But now in front of her stands a desperate girl who needs help, because someone dear to her has disappeared. The guy asked her to calm down, because everything would be fine, and then asked her to explain everything in order. As it turned out, her sister was kidnapped, and 2 hours ago, the lady who lives next door was supposed to bring her home. Raoul smiled and promised that he would definitely find her, and he even knew approximately where she might be. He will let her know as soon as he finds his sister. She should stay here for now, and Bernard will take care of her. The butler bowed, explaining that she had made the right choice in turning to the young master. Meanwhile, Pierce tracked the kidnappers, while Raoul, Jake, and Philip made their way to the horses. They also received permission to carry out the operation from the mayor. Philip, in turn, gave them a list of rats, and the mayor promised to certainly reward them later. In this list, he wrote down the location of all the city's criminals, using all available communication channels. Raoul also obtained all the information he could, making sure to eliminate the flaws in the plan. At that very moment, 2 guys were watching them, hiding in the bushes, and were talking to each other about something. Meanwhile, judging by the tracks on the ground, their lair is here. So he found them and was about to begin the operation. He then decided to climb a tree, trying to use his newly learned skill. Activating detection, he found several archers hiding near the entrance to the lair. The young master was right. They had set up magic circles and barriers. He had to report it. Raoul replied that they would be there in 5 minutes. But 6 months ago, Pierce's life was completely different. The youngest son of Earl Ashton, Raoul, unlike his brothers, was a weak and untalented child. Most of the servants and knights avoided him when he sought volunteers to go with him, and few expressed a sincere desire. Raoul visited the training ground and talked with the knights, among whom was Pierce. Then he said that he wanted to go beyond his limits, and Raoul was ready to help him with this. Then he took the sword in his hands and began to guide Pierce, drawing attention to the points that needed improvement. Even though he said he wanted to achieve more, he doubted that this kid would be able to teach him anything. But sometime later, the knight noticed that his movements had become much clearer and more efficient. It was difficult for him to master the bear strike because his advantage is not in strength, but in dexterity, so he must hone his archery. Few people knew that he could shoot a bow, but Raoul noticed this. Perhaps he could really help him. It was the best decision of his life, and the father who refused his offer must be kicking himself now. It is unknown why he hid his strength, but thanks to the skill books he bought, Pierce improved his skills in addition to his bow. Without his help, he would not have succeeded, and perhaps today, Raoul will demonstrate his true strength. At that very moment, the archer noticed the approaching horses, after which he jumped from the tree and dropped to one knee. He politely greeted Raoul, who greeted his subordinate warmly. The guy noticed the lair of a criminal group, which was closed by a third-level magic circle. All the lairs are similar, no matter what city they are in, but spies of the Crane Empire are hiding here. Typically, Connect players receive quests while at starting points like Mira, and then receive rewards. But now they are dealing with more serious villains. A slave trader who kidnaps people, mercenaries who want to make more money. All of them are nothing compared to the Crane spies, the so-called Imperial Trackers. They track down players, preventing them from cooperating with others. The Bloodhounds are causing a lot of trouble, so Raoul can't let them continue to run amok. The boy gave the order to Pierce, who immediately fired his bow, hitting 2 hidden spies. When they passed inside the barrier, they thought that this path was open for them. Now Raoul wanted to dispel the magic circle with the scroll he had recently acquired, but suddenly he stopped, noticing the flow of mana. And then another idea appeared in his head. Perhaps he would be able to absorb it. So he took out a knife and decided to damage the magic circle. Once the boy realized it was working, he continued to deal damage, breaking the seal. The magic circle was destroyed, and now he can save money instead of spending it on scrolls. Pierce ordered Jackson and Neil to move on to the decoy stage, and he would let them know when it was safe to enter. It was very convenient that Raoul had his elite knights by his side, because now it was time to hunt. They were ordered to take no prisoners and to remember to use the rapier to deliver the finishing blow. Jake didn't understand why they had to poke with that stick, but he was ready to do as he was told. Pierce was supposed to cover the search for the captives. His main task was to rescue Nikki, Nakia's younger sister. After this, Raoul opened the gate, and the team confidently headed inside. In front of them was a shaft that looked like an incredibly long corridor. Sometime later, they found the shelter itself, after which Pierce used the stealth skill. A few minutes later, he sent a message that he had successfully penetrated the enemy base. In front of them was a huge cave with high ceilings and wooden railings. After Raoul finished his analysis, he signaled to his comrades that they could move out. The guy began to actively gesture, explaining the plan, after which the company immediately moved forward. The opponents were stunned by the sudden appearance of Raoul, who attacked them from above. The rest of the team also entered the battle, eliminating their opponents one by one. When the thieves realized they were under attack, everyone was immediately ordered to guard the entrance and kill the trespassers. With each passing second, their numbers increased, and they also began to block arrows with their shields. The archers noticed Raoul, who was at the top, and then tried to shoot him with arrows. However, the boy remained standing, using telekinesis to stop the arrows in front of him. The archers were stunned that the arrows simply bounced off him, after which they demanded reinforcements. At that very moment, warriors began to approach Raoul from behind, quickly climbing the stairs. When they realized that they couldn't take him down with an arrow, they decided to attack him hand to hand. The guy reached behind his back, taking out a bow. We decide it's time to use this. Arrows flew around Raoul, which he kept under control, and at the same second, he soared into the air. The opponents were stunned by this turn of events, not expecting him to use magic. The boy used his strength to direct arrows at helpless enemies who had no shields. Then he took out a rapier. It was a light weapon, but not powerful enough. You need to apply more force to pierce the armor. Having descended to the ground and finished off the enemies, the guy noticed that the others had disappeared somewhere. Meanwhile, the surviving thieves asked their comrades to save themselves because they would not be able to defeat these monsters. Raoul was stunned that Jake, the bastard, was rebelling against the use of the rapier. It would be better to save mana, because he reminded me several times not to leave traces indicating swordsmanship. And while there was probably no need to worry so much, drinking with the small fry was over. Sometime later, Pierce reported that they had searched the entire prison but had not found Miss Nikki. However, they gave the remaining prisoners clothes and food and told them to calmly wait for the end of the battle. Jake doubted that they had dealt with all the criminals, and it was not a fact that these were the same kidnappers. There was no Nikki here, and all the criminals they encountered were equal in strength, which proved the absence of a leader. A magic circle was waiting at the entrance, but the magician was not there, which means that the big shots and prisoners are in another place. Pierce checked all the suspicious areas, but found nothing. Perhaps a skilled magician is working here. It had only been a month since he became a member, so he did a good job. When Raoul praised Pierce, he ordered everyone to follow him because he knew where they were hiding. When they arrived at the huts, Raoul gave orders to watch them and report if they found anything suspicious. All the rooms were clean. They only had to check the last one they entered together. At the same moment, he kicked the table away and then struck the ground with his blade, destroying it. The wooden parquet floor was destroyed, and underneath it, there was a secret iron door. Raoul used telekinesis to open it, revealing a secret staircase leading to the basement. The guy was the first to sense something approaching, and a monster's hand suddenly appeared from the basement. A huge red monster appeared in front of them and began to let out an angry roar. Philip ordered them to stay in close formation, since it was pointless to scatter, as it would be more difficult to suppress them. As the monsters began to emerge from the basement, Raoul had already begun to fight the first one, stabbing him in the heart with a rapier. These were the demons of the Imperial Cavalry, their vital organs located differently from those of humans. They needed to cut off their heads, while Jake wondered what they were doing there anyway. Right during the battle, the first thing Raoul decided to do was study their characteristics. This demon was level 41. His class was Experimental Mutant, and he was currently on a rampage. That's exactly what the guy thought, because these guys had caused him a lot of problems in his past life. After 6 months of playing Connect, he was tasked with raiding a tax empire in the starting city. At the moment when the best players had almost cleared him out, he needed to finish what he started. 10 of them changed classes twice and formed a punitive force of hundreds of guilds to capture the fortress. However, once the secret Imperial Cavalry showed up, most players didn't last even a minute. That day, he miraculously escaped from there, and for the next 6 months, none of the players dared to approach the Empire's lair. At that time, the demonic cavalry numbered about 50 individuals. It is not surprising that players under level 50 were unable to defeat them. Today, there are far fewer demons, and their level of training cannot be compared to the skill of elite knights. Moreover, now Raoul could clearly observe all the enemy's vulnerable spots. This was enough to dodge in time and deliver counterattacks. The guy was quite agile, and so he didn't expose himself to the blow, in turn attacking the monster with a rapier. A few minutes later, several monsters lay lifeless on the ground. It was unclear what they were doing here, and whether they had confused the entrance to the main courtyard of the Imperial Palace. They would have to find out. The rest must take care of the prisoners, and they must quickly find the main criminals before they are informed of their arrival. Philip suggested that the master stay behind them and let them deal with the enemies while he was busy searching. You can't grab everything at once. Raoul will still get experience points even if he doesn't kill the bastards with his own hands. It's time to delegate responsibilities, because it's very nice to have reliable subordinates. Holding his shield in front of him, Jake prepared for battle, slowly opening the steel door. Their eyes immediately widened when they saw the laboratory where the horrific experiments were being conducted. It is bold of them to locate a laboratory for conducting experiments with chimeras in another country. It turns out that those demons are most likely the missing mundanes, and the kidnappers turned out to be crazier than they thought. Raoul had seen similar scenes many times before, and at first, he thought about joining the Empire, because in 10 years, she will completely seize power on the continent, but she is controlled by one crazy psycho. Following orders from such a person is like sitting on a powder keg. There are many rumors about the Emperor, but one thing is known for sure. He treats people as a means to an end. All who do not have noble blood in their veins are divided into classes based on the use they can bring, living a life full of endless burdens of suffering, and one day they become unnecessary. For this purpose, they are used as lab rats or as food for the demonic cavalry. If members of the upper class act against the will of the emperor, they are executed. One day, a general spoke out against tyranny, and at that very moment, the mark on his shoulder flashed red. He was instantly torn to pieces, and this scene was forever imprinted in Raoul's memory. He has given up on the idea of joining anyone to save himself, and now he must do everything to stop the experiments. Suddenly, Philip called out to him, calling him to look at the magicians who were about to activate the magic circle. There were 4 knights, 3 mages, and 10 demons. It looks like the mages are setting up a magic circle at the entrance of the cave. Philip decided to take on the knights, pierce the mages, and Jake had the imperial cavalry. He also asked Raoul to cover for them, while Jake was unhappy that he was left to do all the dirty work. Pierce shot one of the mages with his bow, after which everyone remained, realizing that intruders had broken in. However, the company has already rushed into action, having distributed its responsibilities in advance. Among these people, there is a 5th-level mage. He must be dealt with first. Arrows usually can't penetrate such a barrier, but with telekinesis, it is possible. Having pulled the bowstring, Raoul thought that it was possible to set the trajectory of the arrow's flight. With the chief mage fallen, it was clear that they would no longer be able to escape through the teleportation gate. The escape route was blocked, so the warriors were ordered to break the seal and kill the violators. Concentrating the energy within themselves, the warriors in steel armor rushed into the attack with shouts. Raoul watched in surprise as several knights ran towards him. The guy stood in place, when suddenly Philip appeared in front of him, holding out a shield in front of him, taking the blow. He could barely hold them back. It was surprising that the strength of a high-class knight wasn't enough. The knight's mark affected the growth of all his characteristics, even though he was only level 71. During the battle, Jake tried to figure out what was going on and why they were being crushed so much. He turned to Raoul, asking permission to use his sword, as it would be difficult to kill them with a rapier. Philip and Pierce are doing a great job of dealing with the enemy, but he's having some trouble. Raoul took him with him because he believed in his abilities, but it seems that was a mistake. These words angered Jake, who began to furiously swing his rapier, inflicting severe wounds on his enemies. Satisfied with the result of his words, the guy decided that it was time for him to work too. Watching him, Jake was surprised that the master managed to find their weak points so quickly. One of the warriors was angry that the intruders were superior to them in strength. He decided to find out who they were, while Raoul's retinue continued to fight them. They fight with rapiers, which means they must belong to the Viscounty of Rendell, but their movements are rather clumsy. He had already answered them that he didn't need to know about it because he would die soon anyway, and all they could do was chatter. These words angered the warrior, who could not believe that this man was insulting the Imperial Rangers. Suddenly, he noticed Raoul, who was standing behind them, and decided that he was their commander. At that very second, he came up with an idea of how they could get out of here alive, after which he gave the order to give their lives for the Emperor. Suddenly, the warriors who were once human turned into monsters and attacked Jake. It was a skill that deprived the user of mana and life energy and allowed them to gain incredible strength for a short period of time. Apparently, they had something in mind if they resorted to this method. They had to be careful. At that very second, the very knight who had given the order began to run towards Raoul. He used power armor, absorbing mana from the stone, thereby strengthening his defense. Suddenly, Philip ran towards him, deciding to try to distract him. But when he struck him with the rapier with all his might across the chest, the blade only slid along the armor. The force field blocked his attack. The warrior was already swinging his fist at Raoul. The knight was sure that the boy was finished, striking at the place where the enemy commander stood. But his eyes widened in surprise when he noticed that the boy blocked his attack with one hand. Cordovoy also had power armor and was able to modify its parts even though it was level F. But now he had to destroy this guy at any cost, so he swung his fist again. Meanwhile, Raoul was trying to figure out what happened as he was about to dodge using the flash skill. But suddenly a notification popped up that he had collided with power armor, and he felt as if he was pinned to the spot. And now he has Awakened Regnator, because according to his status data, he has a unique characteristic. The guy has fulfilled all the necessary conditions and can now activate the regnator. He had insufficient mana reserves and was searching for additional energy sources. A barrier that blocks all physical attacks but is weaker than a mana blade. It was a defensive skill that could neutralize spells of at least the third circle of magic. Inside it is a mysterious core that increases the owner's mana and physical abilities. A wearer of power armor cannot be defeated, even if the opponent has a higher level and more experience points. Its power is unfathomable, but it was created for the residents of Connect, so players cannot use it. It remains their pipe dream, and for NPCs, it was the only way to fight back against players. But now, the power armor belonged to Raoul, which made him incredibly happy and pleased. Meanwhile, the knight was trying to understand why it still had no effect on the guy, even though he was hitting with all his might. The next attack threw Raoul back several meters, and his shield began to slowly weaken. At the same second, the guy summoned a rapier and a dagger with telekinesis, putting them into a fighting stance. With an incredibly sharp movement, he rushed forward, managing to break through the enemy's barrier. The knight couldn't believe that this was his end, so he decided to take everyone with him to the grave. He did this for the honor of the Empire, after which his body began to glow purple. The man was pierced by terrible pain, and his entire body began to become covered in a black substance. Raoul instantly realized that in a moment he would merge with the power armor, which would not be to their advantage. Suddenly, he received a notification that Regnator had discovered a forbidden fragment of power. As per the oath, part of the seal is released, when suddenly Raoul began to shine with a bright light. Regnator was ready to show his true power, and now the boy was wrapped in heavy armor. Now, two titans have met in a battle that could destroy everything around them. The first to attack was the knight, who jumped up and swung his fist towards Raoul. Jake, Philip, and the other monsters paused in their battle, watching in shock as someone else fought. At that very moment, a loud explosion erupted, throwing the monsters back and forcing the knights to cover themselves with their shield. This attack did not cause any damage to Raoul, but the recoil weakened the enraged monster. Without wasting any time, the guy said goodbye to him, after which he trampled him straight into the ground. At that very second, the armor began to disappear, and Raoul hoped that he was lying down within the time limit. When he started coughing up blood, Philip and Jake ran up to him, asking how he was feeling. The guy felt something like this for the first time, as if he had lifted the curtain of eternal power. This time, he borrowed energy from other sources, but he promised that one day he would manage on his own. When it was all over, Raoul discovered a pocket teleporter in a mana stone. He decided that they would find a use for them later, and Philip reported that they had found Nikki and the other hostages. They did everything they could, so the survivors will soon be ready to return to their families. Jake reminded him of the treasure he wanted to take and give it a second life. It would be foolish to throw such valuable things away in an unknown place, and Raoul realized he was right. He won't be able to wear the power armor, but it will serve as proof that they caught the Rangers. The Bloodhounds weren't easy to defeat because the boy remembers how easily they took the lives of ordinary people. But now there is no need to provoke them into new battles. It is better to focus on strengthening their combat power. Raoul asked him to forget about it because he needed this armor for the plan, and it was also his trophy. Instead, they will receive a reward for their work, and now they must return to the city and have a good rest. Jake was pleased with this development, while Pierce declared that the bait had worked, and they would carry out everything in the best possible way. Raoul was curious to see what they would do, although everything here was too obvious. Still, he would like to see their dismayed faces when they realized they've fallen into a trap. Meanwhile, the three Randall brothers were asking the guide if they were going in the right direction. They followed him into the forest, lost the trail. Because of Raoul, they ended up in a temple, and also lost all their money and weapons. They lost their mana and lost, so there were only 12 knights left in the guard. Jeremy even donned power armor. They can't miss the chance to take revenge while the guy is outside of Mira. Meanwhile, the guide announced that they had arrived at the place, after which he led them into the mine. At first they were hesitant because the place looked creepy, but they would have to search it. A few minutes later, a huge chest with gold coins and a sword lying around it caught my eye. They didn't find the boy, but they did get their hands on gold, magical items, artifacts, and even the corpses of criminals. But the biggest find was the power armor, which was quite well preserved. Meanwhile, the soldiers patrolling the street noticed several silhouettes on horseback. When the horsemen approached them, the knights were surprised to recognize the young master. They thanked him for taking the hit while they cleared the hideout in the eastern forest. These are novice knights and members of the First Guild, 6 of them have reached expert level, while the others are preparing for it. Each of them is trained in the Ashton County sword skill and how to use mana. Their ranks have grown to hundreds of fighters, and now I fear no criminal. A few hours later, when they returned to Mira, the guards were surprised by a crowd of warriors from County Ashton. Even in the middle of the night, people crowded around them to watch the arrival of the heroes. They were immediately met by the commander, who was ordered to gather all the civilians. People whispered among themselves that this guy had found the missing people, and their children would be saved. Nakia, who was standing in the front row, immediately noticed Nikki, who was in Raoul's arms. The guy explained that she was not feeling well now, but they would take care of her at the palace, and she would definitely get better. They saved the lives of many people who could have died, and changed the future of one girl. Perhaps Nakia will never become a great alchemist, and will never create a potion that will change this world. But Raoul hopes that she will play an important role in the prosperity of the Empire, because now a lot has changed. He no longer follows the principles of humanity and is not afraid to take away someone's future. He could have saved many more people today if he had acted faster, but he turned his back on them, wanting to please Nakia. He still managed to achieve his goal and free many prisoners, and the city is no longer in danger. But for some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety when he looked at ordinary citizens. There are people who don't have to complete tasks, but they will have to go through much more serious tests. Now the guy realized how selfish his intentions were, and he avoided ordinary people, not wanting to waste time on them. After being reborn, he promised himself to forget about the past, but continued to live as if there was nothing more important in this world than the game. There is nothing wrong with living by the rules of the game system, but it is wrong to let it determine the meaning of life. Until this day, Raoul had made plans based on Do Hyun's goals. But now, this approach limits his options. If a task arises that an aristocrat can complete without the help of gaming gadgets, then he will not repeat the mistakes of the past. The people of Mir are grieving the loss of loved ones, so we ordered Philip to collect their personal information. It is also necessary to provide all victims with monetary compensation and help them find work. The knight was surprised, because usually the master only intervenes in those matters whose solutions benefit the common cause. Everyone would be happy to carry out this order, but Philip hinted at one grumpy comrade. Jake stated that he was not against good deeds, but still asked Raoul to let him go for the weekend. When he received an affirmative answer, he began to praise the young master. The support of the guilds would be a great help in the fight against other guilds, but he also liked to see them happy. Perhaps he could have stayed here to gain practical experience and improve his skills. The next day, the mayor apologized for causing us so much trouble, but thanks to them, Mira can breathe a sigh of relief. The man couldn't close his eyes after learning about the evil creatures. If he hadn't warned them, they would have been in big trouble. Raoul himself was surprised that the dark forces of the Empire would reach the territory belonging to the Kingdom of Reuben. However, this was not the first wave of kidnappings, but the agreement tied their hands and feet. It prohibits the creation of their own army, and they can only afford guards. However, outside the city, she loses some of her abilities, and therefore they could not search for the kidnappers. Just as Raoul had expected, representatives of the Viscounty of Rendell visited them. They claimed to have destroyed the kidnappers' lair and demand compensation. They should have thrown them out, but Raoul asked them not to do that. The mayor didn't understand why he wanted to portray them as heroes, since it was the guy who deserved all the honors and glory. Raoul thanked him for his concern, but still hoped that he would fulfill his request. The mayor didn't know how to reward them because he thought the money wouldn't be enough, so Raoul asked him for a favor. The guy heard that the man had a large collection of valuable books, so he asked to look into his library. The mayor was surprised but immediately agreed, offering to choose any book he liked. However, he was sure that this was not enough, so he decided to take him to the secret treasury so that he could choose a gift for himself. He always shows generosity to those who deserve it, because only the blind would not notice it. Sometime later, the servant brought him to the library, where all the books were at his disposal. Looking at the huge shelves, at first glance, you wouldn't realize that this is a real treasure. There are countless skills stored here, and the system had already offered him the opportunity to purchase the book he picked up. The size of the library was astonishing, and just looking at all these books filled Raoul with deep wisdom. He may never return here again, so the opportunity to find that treasured book cannot be missed. Suddenly he noticed a book lying on the top shelf, which emitted a dim light, and decided to check it out. These were studies of ancient rituals, spells, and methods of mental cultivation. As soon as the guy opened it, he immediately discovered the S rank Quercus Meditation Art. Only an S-rank psychokinetic could master the skills in this book, and he realized that he had found the right book. In his past life, his B-rank meditation skills didn't stop him from reaching the top of the Connect rankings. While he was looking for a way to increase his spiritual power, the guilds and other players had already taken all the skill books. Soon everyone learned about Quercus's art of meditation, and a fire mage from Japan revealed a secret. The mayors of the starting cities keep S-rank copies in their mansions, one of which he found in Mira's library. But this time, his spiritual strength will not run out, because he has accumulated enough energy to study the art of meditation. At first, the effect of extrasensory abilities will be very small, but will gradually increase, and a certain amount of spiritual strength will greatly forgive him the task. If he reaches the same level of skill that he had in his past life, victory will be his. As a gift from Ronaldo, he chose a ring of mana, although there were plenty of similar ones in Ashton County. Now it's time to start customizing, because he completed all 70 tasks in one night. He also learned all the skill books up to rank C and tried all the rare items and collected 50,000 game coins. In just 1 month, his physical characteristics have reached the 65-point threshold, and he can now be considered an experienced player. The characteristics of swordsman and psychokinetics and the highest rank reach 90 points. In his past life, he achieved the same results. Now Raul is going to score them in all stats and maybe become the first player to reach 100 points. It sounds like a dream now, but he knows that all roads are open to him now. He was reborn, retaining his previous inventory, and he also managed to unlock skill decks, and now he can also activate Regnator. In skill decks' case, he was tasked with breaking the seal, and to do this, he had to complete 50 more tasks. However, with Regnator, everything is different. Even the current power seems unbearable to him. Also, thanks to the new skill, he can see the status of NPCs and track the flow of mana. Along with this, a new task appeared, and clearing the Imperial Shelter played the role of a trigger, opening it earlier. If he follows the already familiar path, he will constantly encounter the military of the Empire. After all, they are also looking for fragments of the Magic Stone, and we need to pave the way so as not to cross paths with them. Now, there is no need for this, because the guy himself decides how to construct a scenario and what task to complete next. He will no longer dance to the system's tune. Raul will follow his desires, even if they go against the script. The next day, when Raul was in his office, Bernard came in to see him. He announced that Miss Nikki had regained consciousness and that Miss Nikia was asking to meet with him. When the boy came into the room, he was immediately greeted by the maid and Nakia, who was sitting near her sister's bed. She immediately began to thank him for saving Nikki, but he asked her not to worry about it. At that very second, the girl opened her eyes and thanked him for saving her. Suddenly, Nakia apologized to him, explaining that she was a little shy. The guy noticed that she was clearly unwell, but he still wanted to take a closer look. But as soon as he looked into her eyes, he suddenly felt that he was in the middle of huge waves. Raul was stunned by this, unable to believe that the others could not see anything. To make sure, he decided to use the keen eye he had recently acquired. Raul thought she was an ordinary child, but looking at her characteristics, everything turned out to be completely different. Her potential was SS rank, although she was only level 5 and her stats were low. The disease suppresses her characteristics, but you can try to cure her and return her to her previous state. It was scary to even imagine how powerful she would become in the future, but now he needed more information. A few days later, the guy was able to collect all the necessary information. They will soon leave Mira, and so far, everything is going according to plan, so they just need to stay on track. They captured more slave traders and other scoundrels, and also rescued about 50 people. Mira is now the safest place on the continent. Construction is complete, and the guild house has opened its doors to its first guests. Many residents of the city decided to thank them for saving their lives and offered to help. There were talented workers among them, so he was confident in the success of the completed work. All that remained was to resolve the issue with Nakia. First of all, Raul asked about Nika's health, and as it turned out, she was on the mend. The girl thanked him again for inviting priests to help her sister. In reality, everything is completely different. Nikki is still unwell, and divine power alone is not enough here. Nakia heard that he was leaving today, but she still hadn't managed to thank him properly. They stayed longer than they had planned, and were now in a great hurry, but the girl wanted to be of service to them. However, the girl is afraid that Raul will turn out to be the same as all the noble aristocrats she has met before. There are so many greedy people in the world. First impressions can be deceiving, and yet she doesn't want to disappoint him. The guy asked her to stop filling her head with all sorts of thoughts and read this, after which he handed her several sheets of paper. When she read them, she dropped the documents in shock, because it was a letter pardoning Nakia. The girl tried to understand how he managed to do this, but, as it turned out, money works wonders. This document forgives all the mistakes the girl has made throughout her life. He had to spend a considerable amount of money to get the Alliance's permission, but it was nothing compared to Nakia's value. For 5 years, she suffered from the ban on using mana and thought that she was forever stuck in this quagmire. Meanwhile, Raoul asked her to tell him how she got the ban on using mana. Her mentor saw her talent and helped her join the Alchemists Association, and at a young age, she became famous as a gifted alchemist. But disaster struck unexpectedly. Her city was engulfed in an epidemic, and she lost her family. When she got home, only Nikki was waiting for her. Nakia took her with him, but the misfortunes did not end there. When Nikki was 6, she was diagnosed with an incurable disease, and she believed it was her fault. For 2 years, she searched for a cure, but when death came very close to Nikki, she made a decision. Nakia broke the taboo and used alchemy on a human, using substances stolen from the association to keep her alive. But the girl couldn't feed her medicine forever, and without it, she would immediately lose consciousness. And soon, her deception was exposed. But suddenly, Raoul handed her a flask and asked her to drink it. It was supposed to free her. After drinking the potion, Nakia felt a new sense of peace, as if those 5 years had never happened. Raoul watched with satisfaction as Nakia's stats changed in the status window. Only now did the girl understand how exactly she could thank him. She will serve Sir Raoul faithfully and look forward to seeing him save and make many other people happy. Stroking her head, he accepted her devotion and would never forget her words. The guy then took another stack of papers, which he also handed to the surprised Nakia. These were the notes on the maniphilaria that should help Nikki, the works of one great alchemist who left this world. However, they are missing a fragment, so she will have to pore over them. But now, Nakia can create the perfect medicine for her sister. Sincerely crying, the girl promised to make the best medicine in the whole wide world. Now, she had definitely decided that she would serve Raoul faithfully and truly until the end of her days. When Nakia left, the guy thought that he was not used to conversations of this kind, but he would learn to find a common language. Today is a big day, and for the first time, he has put in a lot of effort to bring a new member into the ranks of the first guild. An alchemist who will leave his mark on history and also create a miraculous cure. After all, the great alchemist who left this world is Nakia, but she doesn't need to know about it. In the past, she struggled with an incurable disease, and after much research, she finally created a cure. But he deliberately gave her an incomplete recording so that she could develop her skills. But if something happened, he would give her the missing fragment. At this point, his mission in the world is over, and it is time to move on to the next destination. And this is the capital of the Kingdom of Reuben, also known as the Tomb of the Sword, the large and populous city of Turim. Raoul was looking forward to meeting him, so he was already ready to set off. When they reached the capital, they noticed a crowd of people and a huge difference with Mira. Raoul ordered everyone to go forward, as Ashton County had no queue. Most of the first guild members remained in the world. He took few people with him to make things easier. But when they entered the city, the guy was surprised to notice that no one was meeting them. He immediately asked Bernard if he had sent a message about their visit, but he answered in the affirmative. There must have been a mistake, and he decided to go to the estate and bring an escort. But Raoul suggested that they all go together. Bernard asked a passing woman if she knew where the Ashton County estate was, but she had no idea. The men were also unsure, so they suggested looking for him in the Noble area. At the checkpoint in the Noble district, they were told that the Earl of Ashton's estate was not there. Raoul knew his family wasn't particularly popular, but he didn't think it was that popular. The townspeople have no idea what influence their family has. The capital is far away, and the father rarely comes here. It's strange that no one has heard of the Ashton estate. There must be a huge estate around here somewhere. Raoul asked Bernard to visit the Information Bureau and find out the address of the Ashton estate. Sometime later, the guard examined the paper and was surprised, because it was Baron Gendar's address. Raoul was surprised and did not know that Mr. Gendar had been living there for about 10 years. But they decided to accompany them. Bernard explained that Gendar, his 50-year-old distant relative, is responsible for managing foreign affairs. The guy frowned, but was still determined to see the estate with his own eyes. A few minutes later, 2 guards wanted to see their invitation. Philip announced that the person in front of them was the Earl of Ashton's youngest son, Sir Raoul, and that they would like to see the Foreign Secretary. However, they did not understand what kind of invitation was being discussed, and the guard told them about some kind of celebration. The knight asked them to wait near the tents while he found out everything, which made Raoul a little nervous. This attitude did not suit Raoul's subordinates, because their master was on his own territory. Suddenly, several guards ran up to them, but at the same second, they threw down their weapons and ran away. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events and could not understand why they ran away. At that very moment, a man with a sword in his hand approached them, asking who they were and what kind of mess they were causing. Philip explained that he was the Grand Knight of the Order of the Golden Bear of Ashton County, and then asked where the Baron was. As soon as the man realized who was standing in front of him, his face also changed, and he immediately began to apologize. After this, he gave the order to his subordinates to escort the surviving guests to the reception hall. The rumors weren't lying. The estate is truly huge. It would take a long time to go around all the possessions. Then Raoul noticed the main building of Ashton County, where only direct relatives were allowed to enter. However, it is from there that the music comes. The equipment yard is filled with strangers. He explained that today was Aaron's birthday, the owner's youngest son. Jake really didn't like that the guard called the Baron the owner of the estate. At that very second, a man came out of the building and addressed Raoul first. The Baron seemed strong, but he wasn't even an expert, and now it's clear why people don't take the county seriously. He can understand his father's decision to entrust him with the vision of foreign affairs, but he is not going to accept it. The man noted that they had not seen each other for a long time, although, in fact, he was his uncle, but no one had mentioned him in that way. Ashton's family tree is quite convoluted, and it would be difficult to explain their connection, so he suggested just calling him Uncle. Raoul decided not to let him take advantage of him, and asked Bernard to explain everything in normal language. The butler immediately explained that Baron Jindar was Count Ashton's second cousin, Raoul's second cousin, who currently serves as Minister of Foreign Affairs. The man didn't like the attitude, but the boy assumed he was just making fun of Ashton County. Philip added that, apart from his direct descendants, only Viscount Austin has the right to address him informally. When the Earl's children come of age, they inherit the title of Viscount and part of the territories. Then Raoul asked to answer why his second cousin, whom he was seeing for the first time, had changed his position above him. Jindar apologized, promising to address him with all respect. And the guy asked to explain what was going on here. They did not. The man was surprised, since he had ordered a cart to be sent for them, but they were also curious as to why there were strangers in the main building. Jindar explained that this was necessary in order to show everyone what they were worth, and it was necessary to arrange a big celebration. Philip decided to ignore this attitude, while Pierce found something in the yard. Judging by the invitation, the holiday had nothing to do with Ashton County. It only included the names and coat of arms of the Jindar family. The man swore it was just a piece of paper and a formal reception on behalf of the county. He then frowned, deciding that the guy was acting outside his authority, asking him not to forget that he was not at home. He then explained that according to ancient tradition, they always hold the celebration in the main building when it is empty. Other members of the nobility are allowed inside the mansion, but only with the permission of the Earl of Ashton. Raoul ordered me to complete the celebration within an hour, as a trusted person temporarily carrying out the will of His Excellency. Jindar immediately opposed you, because he couldn't just send all the guests home. Raoul immediately frowned, deciding that his uncle had chosen to refuse to follow the order. Then he pulled out his rapier, asking them to worry about the family members rather than the guests. The guy didn't show much generosity by giving them an hour to settle the matter, so Gendar reluctantly decided to carry out the order. The worst that could happen was for his father to scold him, but it was interesting to see where the Baron got so much confidence and fearlessness. No concrete evidence of the fall of Ashton County has ever been found. Perhaps Raoul can find it here. Nobody knows, but maybe he'll hit the jackpot here and prevent the family's downfall. Raoul was stunned that instead of placing them in the main building, they gave them an outbuilding. Since the main building was too crowded, Mr. Gendar ordered that a separate place be prepared for them. However, the guy didn't want to listen to this. He intended to live only in the Ashton County mansion. As soon as Raoul walked into his office, he immediately began making claims against the Baron. The Baron dared to settle his entire family into a 3-story mansion, where only the Count and his relatives had the right to be. The guy demanded an explanation, deciding that the Baron would insist that he was also using the office according to tradition. The man explained that these were temporary measures, as it would be wasteful to keep the house empty. Raoul ordered them to leave the building immediately, because he would not care that they were related. And from that moment on, he relieves the Baron of his duties as Minister of Foreign Affairs. If he wishes to raise an objection, let him bring documents tomorrow showing that he is fully performing his work. These words seriously angered the Baron, who silently headed for the exit. A little later they sorted this out, and all the guests and relatives glared at the Baron with displeasure. Now Raoul needs to find some information. And he's lucky it wasn't disposed of. All documents related to management and finances are in this office. The Baron is confident that he will not be able to find a way to deal with it. However, in his past life, he studied business administration and worked in a trading company. Philip announced that his family had left the building without even causing a scene. But they clearly think that they will still soon return and live here as if nothing had happened. However, it is necessary to quickly get rid of rotten people, and it is better not to miss the moment while they still look down on them. Moreover, the first guild branch will always fit in perfectly, and in his house, it is Raoul who sets the rules. Even if the Baron was under someone's protection, everyone had to simply believe in the strength of Ashton County. Jake was on the master's side and asked the others to stop talking seriously. The guy supported him, because now they needed a good rest, and tomorrow, great things awaited them. The strongest of them grabbed his comrades and led them to the exit, while they grumbled discontentedly. Meanwhile, Raoul and Bernard began their search, as time was running out. The next day, the boy decided to train with the butler, testing his fighting skills. However, this training was difficult for Bernard, and the weapon immediately fell to the ground. Raoul didn't think he would learn to wield two swords so quickly, although he still had room to grow. It's only been a month and a half since Bernard discovered his psychic abilities with the help of a skill book, but now they've decided to move on to the arts, because his power is measured not only by super strength. The easiest and most effective way to improve your skill level at the beginning is to apply several skills at once. But just as they were about to begin, the butler turned his gaze, noticing that they had guests. The windy mage is able to pick up information from a great distance, so they decided to welcome the guests. Bernard offered to bring what they had prepared yesterday, and Raoul agreed. The guy was determined to get a reward for his hard work. The butler realized that the expression on the young master's face did not bode well. Before entering the building, Jake assumed that some kind of treasure was buried there. He thought so because he noticed a lot of people gathered inside the building. Some knights exude enormous energy. The outer courtyard is filled with warriors. No matter which way you look at it, it's doubtful that the young master will be able to handle them alone. Meanwhile, Jindar stood satisfied because everything was going according to his plan, and the boy took the bait. In his absence, all issues must be resolved, and then he will be able to calmly take up the post. Large relatives of the Ashton family living in the capital, having learned of what happened, could not remain indifferent. By driving him out of the estate and depriving him of his post as minister, the brat created problems not only for him, but for others as well. After all, they also hosted banquets using funds from the county budget, and even received payment for managing the estate. It was his mistake to arrange a celebration in his own name, using the count's office. But they don't know about it. Surely this brat only knows how to act like a noble aristocrat, but in reality, he has no idea what he's gotten himself into. The man didn't understand why his brother made him his representative, but he wouldn't miss this opportunity. When Raoul entered, people immediately began to whisper that this pompous boy was annoying the Baron. They also mentioned this guy was the winner of the coming-of-age tournament. Rouse had not expected to see so many guests today, assuming that everyone present was concerned about the issue of rights to the estate. Jindar confirmed that they had all gathered here to express their outrage at his unreasonable behavior. The Baron spoke on behalf of everyone, in which case, as the guy promised, they won't figure out who's right and who's wrong. The man explained that for many decades, blood relatives living in the capital managed the estate, taking turns. And this is not so that some brat from the main family will come and create a mess. People immediately began to support him, thinking that it was a joke on the part of His Excellency to give powers to a child. They were unhappy with the cuts in finances, and building new estates and changing management methods would not solve anything. Raoul understood that they were not giving him the opportunity to explain the Baron's guilt. But that was not the most important thing now. The consequences could be much more serious than he imagined. And then he decided to use his keen eye. 5 influential families gathered here, the first being the major relatives of Ashton County. The second ones are scouts from the Crane Empire's Pathfinder Guild, but their appearance is natural. But he never expected to see the third group here, the Knights of Delamian, one of the 5 most influential families. One of them was named Graham. He was level 88 and was a sword expert. There were several other sword experts standing next to him, but it was unclear what the representatives of a much more powerful family were doing here. Raoul also noticed the familiar brothers he had recently defeated, the Knights of Viscounty Rendell. Among them was also Raphael, who was the fourth young master of level 61. He may want to take revenge for the incident in the world, but he clearly won't act openly. The last were the traitors of the Ashton family, the culprits of this chaos, always ready to take the reins of power into their own hands. Among them was Titus, level 65, who was literally devouring the guy with a displeased look. His father, Earl Melvin Ashton, had two brothers, an older brother Jaden and a younger brother Austin. Melvin was the most talented, but according to the birthright, the position of Earl should have gone to Jaden. He was an arrogant and cruel man. He either maimed or killed anyone who bothered him. Once Melvin reached expert ball skills, increasing his chances of getting the job, Jaden became jealous of him. He planned an attempt to kill his brother, but his plan was discovered before he could complete the crime. After this, he was deprived of all privileges, and after some time, Melvin became an earl. Jaden still received the title of Viscount and a large plot of land, but he could not accept the loss. This story happened 15 years ago, when he, Raoul Ashton, was born. The appearance of Viscount Jaden's son makes it clear whose side Baron Gendar is on. The incident that had caused the breakdown in relations with Jaden did not affect the others present in any way. In a past life, Ashton County was divided into many factions and eventually collapsed. They may have made a wise choice, but now he's here to make them realize they made a big mistake. Knowing the whole picture, Raoul can make the first move, and then boldly gives the signal to Philippe. The knight struck his shield with all his might, creating noise and calling for everyone to be silent. Raoul had heard enough complaints, and now it was his turn to speak, after which he asked Bernard and Pierce to distribute the books. Two guys walked among the guests and handed out books to the discouraged guests. It was a report on the management and financial transactions relating to the Earl of Ashton's estate. These were evidence and materials from the investigation into the case of a baron suspected of embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. Stunned, Gendar threw the book on the floor in anger, loudly declaring that it was a fake. This was official data, but the man did not believe that he had arrived only yesterday and had managed to collect all the information in one night. Looking at his reaction with satisfaction, Raoul assumed that he was now ready to have a serious talk. According to documents, 200 people are currently undergoing free training to become knights on the estate's grounds. However, when asked where they were, the Baron answered uncertainly that they had taken their equipment and fled. It was strange that he was recruiting students outside of Turum, although the purpose of the free classes was to spread his influence throughout the capital. However, they will continue their investigation and check the addresses of each of the students listed in this book. It also says that they gave 100 golden balls to other barons as gifts, but 10 of them turned out to be fakes. He also recruited 100 C-rank warriors, although the guy only observes 20 F-rank knights. There are also banquets held regularly, and it is difficult to understand what all this has to do with the costs of running the estate. This whole list simply amazed the guy. It took them the whole night to get this information. When they discovered that some of the documents were fake, they had to break into the Baron's house. There, thanks to his ability to analyze information and Pierce's research skills, they found the original ledger. Then Bernard took over the organization of the report book, and finally, Raoul used copying and made dozens of similar ones. He took the time to open the eyes of everyone present to the machinations of Gendar's defense. The guy provided everyone with evidence that more than half of the funds had been embezzled by the Baron. Suddenly, Gendar spoke up, who couldn't even imagine that his nephew was such a terrible person. The man found it all suspicious because he had never seen such a carefully prepared report in his life. A formal investigation usually takes 2-3 pages at most, but the guy managed to write a whole 30. His nephew claims that he did this work in one day, but this is simply impossible, and he probably planned everything long before his arrival. People immediately began to agree with the Baron, sensing that all this smacked of a political conspiracy. They thought Raoul was trying to save budget resources and had no idea what would happen next. The Baron concluded that this would not happen, after which he called Jackson to him. The knight handed Jake a list of their demands, and if they signed it and left the capital, they would not forgive them for this insulting behavior. They demanded that the right of ownership be transferred to the Baron, the right to run the estate, including managing the estate, and also lift the ban on mastering the art of swordsmanship by family members of the collateral line of kinship. Jake was stunned that they were throwing feasts with the money they earned from hunting monsters. People were immediately outraged by the brazen response, deciding that this was how the main family conducted business. Jake was firm in his refusal. You see, he had never heard such bullshit in his life. Gendar's patience snapped, and he put his hand inside his bosom, taking out a knife. Raoul asked Jake to calm down, after which he angrily threw away the piece of paper with the demands. Gendar was surprised, because he pointed a knife at the boy, but he didn't even bat an eyelash, although he wanted to intimidate him. He is surrounded by 3 of the best knights of the Order of the Golden Bear, and he doesn't have the slightest chance against them. Raoul's knight had insulted them, and if he did not immediately apologize and execute him, they would consider this an insult too. The guy smiled, explaining that Jake had merely stated the facts and then decided that pretense was enough. He knew there was no hope of a peaceful settlement, but he thought the Baron would be, at the very least, confused. After this, the guy took out his sword, declaring that Gendar turned out to be much more vile than he thought. The man became frightened when the boy threateningly declared that he would never sign his ridiculous demands. Then Raoul frowned, asking him to tell him what the Baron really wanted. Gendar had heard that the youngest son was the weakest and most untalented of the sons, but now he did not want to give in to him. The man decided to play to the crowd again, declaring that they would not leave this place until they signed an agreement. After this, 2 knights blocked the exit, hinting at a rather harsh solution to the problem. The Baron urged him to think carefully, feeling that with pressure he could move the boy. But Raoul just laughed, replying that he had dug his own grave by suggesting something like that. The Baron must be aware that his actions could be seen as a declaration of war on the county. People immediately began to be indignant because they had not agreed anyway, and they would not participate against the county. However, it was too late to back down, and now they are all in the same boat, because they have no chance of the Count's forgiveness. Raoul asked what his next steps were, since he was not going to sign the papers. The man decided that the boy had not grasped the essence of what was happening, and hundreds of knights and guards were waiting for his signal. Moreover, he has an ace up his sleeve that even the Order of the Golden Bear cannot handle. The rest just watch, afraid to do anything, in which case no one will stop the guy. Raoul said that he didn't care. The defense was shocked that he wasn't afraid of knights armed to the teeth. The man saved his secret weapon for the most extreme case, and using it, he will definitely unleash a war. But now he had no other choice. Who knew that the rumors that Raoul was weak were lies? The Baron claimed that the boy had insulted him by providing false documents, so he was calling for justice. Throwing the county badge to the ground, he demanded that Raoul make the blood sign. It is a challenge to a duel that can only be issued once in a lifetime, the only way to fight a member of the high nobility. He suggested that this be considered a final act of mercy, as it was better than taking his seal by force. The Baron sincerely thought that taking her in a fair fight would be much more noble. However, the decision remained with Raoul, and if he refused, the Baron would have to use force. The guy immediately began asking about the conditions, since the man himself would not be the duelist. Gendar proposed 3 participants representing the interests of each family, and the battle should be one-on-one. There are many representatives of the Ashton family present in the hall. If anyone supports Raoul, they can take his side. Philip was immediately indignant at such a statement, but the young master immediately stopped him. The guy understood that if he lost, he would sign the papers, but he didn't know what the Baron was putting at stake. The man decided that it didn't matter, but it was a private duel, so the stakes had to be appropriate. Then Raoul suggested that if he won, he would confiscate the homes of everyone whose signature was on the reporting documents. However, if they did not agree, then this duel would not happen, so he gave them time to think. With such antics, he would turn everyone against the Ashton family. But this only played into the Baron's hands. The main thing was to make him fulfill his demands, so he agreed without hesitation, which caused discontent among the others. It wasn't exactly a good deal, but Raoul had already accepted the challenge, and even received a new assignment. Raoul thought that Philip doubted him, but in fact, the knight was afraid that unforeseen circumstances might arise. The duel is arranged for the sake of spectacle. In any case, they will not admit defeat and will refuse to fulfill the conditions. Raoul accepted the challenge, asking for a second to ensure that the Baron kept his word. Gendar turned to one of the guests, asking him to take the place of a second, to which he immediately agreed. All the people immediately turned their heads in surprise towards this man, trying to understand who it was. This guy is known for his excellent sword skills, an outstanding personality, and a rising star. It was Raphael Rendell, the Viscount's fourth son, who looked at Raoul with a smug grin. Everyone was stunned by the appearance of the enemy on the territory of the Ashton estate. Philip and Jake were especially indignant. Raphael explained that he had not intended to come, but it would be impolite to refuse the invitation. Raoul only hoped that this guy would judge this fight dispassionately. After this, the second asked all participants in the duel to come to the center of the hall. Raoul knew that no one had dared to support the Ashton family, but all the better for him, he didn't have to deal with scum. The time has come for the first duel, and Raoul's first opponent is the third son of the Gendar family, Aaron. The boy thought with displeasure that it was the puppy who had ruined his holiday, the weak link in the Ashton family. He had become too arrogant after winning the tournament, but now he would knock him down a peg. As soon as the fight began, Aaron was the first to rush forward, rising into the air and swinging his sword. Raoul only needed to swing his sword slightly to repel the attack and counterattack, emerging victorious. It all happened too quickly, and people didn't even notice when he touched it. But the Baron was the most upset of all. Meanwhile, Raphael asked the guy if he was ready for the next fight. At this time, the second participant approached the second and announced that it was now his turn. It was Baron Kespi, one of the capital's finest swordsmen, and this fight promised to be exciting. When the fight began, Raoul immediately parried the first blow, and Kespi noticed his good technique. After that, they began to exchange blows, and the second son understood why Aaron was knocked out with one blow. The boy has incredible swordsmanship skills, even though he is 20 years younger than him. However, Kespi also had something to surprise him with, so he decided to use the bear strike. The guy was stunned when he realized that Raoul had easily blocked the blow without receiving a scratch. It was a pathetic parody of Raoul's family's technique. But what was this guy thinking using it on him? In this, he has no differences, because he constantly improved it, which means the advantage is on his side. Kespi couldn't believe that this boy was so familiar with this sword technique. However, he was not ready to stop there, after which he swung his sword again. Raoul realized that he had learned new techniques in the capital and was now trying to use them in the fight. People immediately began to support Kespi, deciding that the boy did not have enough combat experience and would not last long. But this was said by losers with an inferiority complex who abandoned their hometowns for life in the capital. In their family, there were also strong personalities, with many virtues who went to Turam in pursuit of a big dream. But these respectable aristocrats chose a different path than the idiots present in the hall. All Raoul had to do was swing his sword to feel the frustration of this battle. If Kespi had delved deeper into studying the Ashton clan's techniques, instead of wasting his time on others, he would have achieved much more. These words angered the guy, and he also decided that the puppy had decided to teach him a lesson. He doubted that he would be able to hand over someone who had 15 years of experience in bear punching. Kespi swung her blade and used a storm wolf strike, but it didn't frighten Raoul. People immediately rejoiced, deciding that this time he would definitely win using such a technique. However, the guy only needed to swing his sword once to cut the wolf in half, stunning his opponent. Kespi still can't get it. It's not what skills he's been taught that matter, but how well you master them. Holding the sword in front of him, the boy stated in shock that he could not defeat him with the basic form of the sword. However, Raoul abruptly changed the trajectory of his sword attack and attacked his opponent at the legs. Kespi tried to understand what had just happened, because he had changed the trajectory of the blade in a matter of seconds. At that very moment, he recognized the fifth form of the bear strike technique, the piercing charge. But then he decided that it was the eighth form, the horizontal cut. After this, Raoul used a fire whirlwind, and after that, a vertical slash. Kespi couldn't get his bearings quickly, because the boy was changing from one form to another so quickly that he couldn't keep up with him. Gradually receiving damage, he tried to raise the commas to see if such a fusion of forms of one technique was possible. The sword technique consists of 3 forms, which are a combination of basic styles. But Raoul's movements are too unpredictable, and in a short period of time he changes forms with lightning speed. He couldn't even imagine that such a gifted offspring was growing up in the Ashton family. And unable to withstand the pressure, he let go of the sword, and the guy put put the blade to his throat. Raoul explained that much can be achieved through a simple combination of forms, and this technique has tremendous power. Kespi decided that this guy was a damn monster who didn't leave a single chance. Keen eyesight, quick reflexes, and the ability to assess the situation are what's needed. Swordsmanship skills are irrelevant. When the opponent lost consciousness and fell, the second announced that Raoul had won. Events take an unexpected turn, although everyone has heard that the Count's youngest son is shirking his martial arts training. However, the Baron was not worried. He was just a boy who had recently taken up a sword, and the next participant would definitely win. If it was who everyone thought it was, then Raoul didn't stand a chance. Raphael asked to greet the last duelist, but he himself wanted to see Ashton swallow dust. He would have thoroughly enjoyed the Brat's defeat, but, frankly, he didn't care about the results of the duel. At that very second, a man stepped forward, announcing his exit. Raphael remembered that his name was Dave. Not a particularly memorable character, Baron Gindar's son, a little older than him, but he is not one to be timid. The second looked at Raoul with an evil smile, wishing him a painful defeat. The third match began, and people immediately started shouting words of encouragement to Dave. Raoul couldn't quite believe that they would put forward a truly serious opponent. The man asked the guy to listen, because he wouldn't repeat it twice, after which she ordered him to surrender peacefully. Otherwise, he will cut him into small pieces with this sword, and if he is going to show off his technique, then he better forget about it. Everyone immediately noticed the white blade, sparkling with the purest mana. Raoul was no match for it. The guy began to concentrate mana around himself, ordering the enemy to stop talking nonsense and attack. With a sharp movement, Raoul repelled the first attack, after which he decided to counterattack. The man decided that this was all the boy could do, asking along the way what had happened to his magnificent attacks. Raoul, you've already noticed that his sword has a mana-boosting effect. While defending himself from the attacks, he tried to guess how long this action would last. After a few minutes, it was noticeable that it was gradually dissipating. However, this only irritated Dave even more, as he was unhappy that the guy was only blocking his attacks. When Raoul blocked another blow, he noticed that his opponent had broken his sword. Apparently, he has a fake mana blade, which means it's time to wrap things up. At that very second, the guy jumped up from his seat, declaring to the Imperial Cur that he had lost. However, this did not stop Dave, causing him to swing his sword again, wanting to destroy the arrogant guy. But as soon as their blades clashed again, Raoul's sword couldn't withstand the force and shattered into pieces. However, the blow knocked Dave back slightly, but Raoul wished him sweet dreams and hit him again. This time the man flew a decent distance and landed on a stone staircase, destroying it. Shaking his hands, Raoul turned to his second, who, along with the rest of the spectators, was in shock. But then Raphael dissatisfiedly announced that the winner of this duel was Raoul. Everyone watched silently as the guy, along with his retinue, headed forward. The guy was upset because he liked this sword so much, while his subordinates praised it, and he asked Philip to detain his last rival, seeing the imperial stigmata on his body. In fact, the knight also found his behavior strange, at which time Pierce brought him a new sword. When Raoul received the new weapons, he immediately turned to the Baron and asked what they would do next. No one understood how it was possible that Dave had broken the rules of the duel, but that didn't change the fact that he was a sword expert. Jindar declared Raoul a cheater, as he had probably pulled some kind of trick, so the results of the duel were annulled. Looking back, the man realized that it hadn't helped, but at that same second, he remembered the documents. This is his last chance to get the support of the Jaden or Randall family. Then he turned to his subordinates, ordering them to take the documents from the guy as quickly as possible. Many immediately grabbed their weapons, deciding that there was no way back, and then rushed into the attack. For Raoul, this was too predictable, so he suggested to his comrades that they have some fun. But suddenly some people stood up to defend them, which genuinely surprised the guy. It was the servants of the Ashton estate who decided to support them and take their side. They ordered each other not to retreat and to hold the line while fighting experienced warriors. While Raoul was trying to figure out what was going on, he stumbled upon an unexpected treasure. Meanwhile, the Baron was angry that they decided to stab them in the back to show their gratitude. However, he himself took into his hands the money that rightfully belonged to them, and they did not know the true traitor. The Count personally recommended these people for admission to the Royal Academy. They showed high results during the tournament. But since the dormitory closes during the holidays, they had to move here temporarily. Living expenses were supposed to be covered by the least allocated funds, but the Baron appropriated them for himself. He even forced students to do chores to save money on servants' wages. Jake began to worry that these people might get hurt, but Raoul told him not to worry, because he would be here soon. At that very moment, the doors opened and a huge man entered the room. Everyone immediately started running away in fear, realizing who they had sent here to deal with the problem. The man ordered a confession from those who dared to wave a sword within the walls of the Earl of Ashton's estate. Everyone recognized him as Mr. Dillon, the Earl's heir, and many did not understand where he came from. One of the guys stood in front of him with a knife, but there was only fear in his eyes. With one wave of his hand, Dillon sent him flying, ordering him to get out of the way. It was a power that was unheard of by others, because he was the strongest warrior in the Reuben kingdom. Meanwhile, the man looked around for the little one, and immediately noticed Raoul. The boy didn't expect his brother to suddenly grab him in his arms and start asking about his life with a smile. Dillon started peppering him with questions, while the guy asked to be put in his place. He noticed that Raoul had grown a lot over the last 2 months, but it was clearly not enough. The guy thought that the Count's successor was wandering around the capital without a shirt, which looked very shameful. Dillon suddenly patted his brother on the head, reminding him that it is important to take care of his health. After all, if he had such a beautiful body, these clowns would not even think of pointing a sword at him. When the man looked at the armed men, they became frightened and began to look away. After this, he openly addressed them, asking if they were ready to answer for their actions. Dillon's knights immediately surrounded the guests, extending their blades in front of them in defense of the host. They will resolve this situation soon, but it is unclear why he brought the vice captain and all the high-ranking knights with him. 25 sword experts will easily defeat the Baron's family, and it will be all over for him. At this time, Raphael tried to save his skin, trying to slip away unnoticed. The Knights of the Republic of Brennan, who were the Baron's secret weapon, turned against him. At that very second, Dillon noticed Raphael, not allowing him to escape, after which he asked to greet his little brother. The guy approached him hesitantly, hearing that he hadn't changed a bit. Ashton remembered him bullying the 3rd and 6th, even though it was 100 years ago. Dillon suddenly became angry when he noticed that Raphael had decided to raise his voice at him. Dillon invited him to stay and chat, but he decided that he would not disturb them. As he was leaving, he asked to tell his first brother that he was ready to fight at any time. The man then asked everyone not involved with the Ashton family to leave as quickly as possible, and those who waved weapons stay, because he has a serious conversation. Turning to the Baron, Dillon asked to look at the document he was so eager to sign. That same evening, Raoul thanked his brother for coming, but he went too far. He mobilized so many men, the vice captain and a bunch of knights, leaving his wife and son unprotected. Dillon just laughed because he couldn't come to his brother empty-handed. But the boy knew why he did it. It was not for nothing that his father entrusted him with the seal, and he simplified the process a little. Without his help, it would have been much more difficult to resolve this conflict. He used the portal and quickly reached the place. Teleporting the entire squad probably cost him 3,000 gold, but that's not the most important thing. Raoul wondered what he would do with the traitors, but his brother declared that they would pay for their sins. Among them are the father's brothers, but he did not say anything against it, which means this is their chance to get rid of the rats. They've gotten away with a lot already, and their capital has been significantly reduced thanks to their efforts. Raoul decided that Dillon was behind everything that was happening, because he was a politically active and calculating person. The guy decided that he hadn't really done anything, they had just started to get too carried away, so he intervened. But Dillon knew that his brother had written a whole report, and had even beaten everyone in the duel, and had done more than was required. Raoul suggested that he save his affection for Livia, but his wife forbids him to touch her, even though he is her father. Suddenly, the guy showed him the report on the results of the blood sign, deciding to ask what to do with it next. All 27 mansions that required him to sign papers now belong to Raoul, and he can do with them as he wishes. The guy was stunned, because all the property would cost at least 100,000 gold, but he thought it was a family matter. But it turned out to be his reward for winning a fair fight, so they rightfully belong to him. He's an Ashton, so he should be 100 times more confident, and he deserves it. Raoul thanked his brother, promising to try to follow his words, and then asked him for a favor. He decided to keep only the Baron's house for himself, since the value of the papers depends on who disposes of them. Dillon promised that he would not lose anything, and as a reward, he would teach him something. Suddenly, the man struck a pose, explaining that Raoul was about to learn the secret to the perfect body. Dillon hoped his brother was already excited, but he was more discouraged. His father and Lawrence are also eager to know him, but he will only reveal him to Raoul, which is what intrigued the boy. After that, he had a hellish month of training with his brother, and he vowed never to train with him again. And finally, the day of admission to the academy came, when Raoul had to leave the estate. Bernard wished him to show good results in the entrance exam. Raoul didn't want to push himself too hard in the children's test, but Dylan had other ideas. After this, his brother asked him to come back after he passed the exam and not to worry about anything. However, the guy wanted to quickly pass the tests and graduate from the academy because studying is just an excuse to get out of the house. Trying to fit into the group will only waste his energy, and he doesn't need that. After some time, they finally reached the academy, in the courtyard of which there were many students. Raoul didn't expect that there would be so many people here on the day of the reception, and this year there were more people than usual. He did not understand what the reason was, because he did not find any information in connection, which aroused suspicion. However, he doesn't expect much from life at the academy, so it hardly matters. Suddenly the boy noticed how the Reuben, Templeton, Randall, and Ashton families began to congratulate him. Raoul was shocked because he had completely different information about other aristocrats. Early on, Philip told him that there would be no applicants from military families this year. The knight replied with surprise that when they left Mira, there was no news of this. Raoul spent a whole month training with his brother, while Bernard took care of the estate management issues. Dylan explained with a smile that he would find out everything soon, asking him to remember not to push himself too hard during the exams. His brother's tone suggested problems, but the boy decided not to pay attention to it for now. Raoul asked Jake and Pierce to gather information, including about the training ground. He didn't expect that this year only strong guys would enroll. Even members of the highest aristocratic circles arrived. In fact, the boy didn't want to compete with his peers, and accidentally said it out loud. There is no need to worry about this. It is better to focus on implementing the plan. At that very moment, the man began to sincerely greet everyone within the walls of the Reuben Kingdom Academy. At first, Raoul thought that he had already studied the staff list and that there was nothing remarkable in it. But then he froze in shock when he noticed the new temporary teacher. This man was Alfredo Gray, one of the 3 sages of the continent, the supreme poppy of the 8th circle. Raoul didn't expect to see this man here, and tried to understand what he was doing here. Alfredo possesses unrivaled powers of illusion and vision, and also practices alchemy. Gray loves to wander the world, for which he was nicknamed the Nomadic Sage. Even a magic tower has to request the location of their master from the Information Guild. It was very unusual that this man so easily took the post of vice-rector of the academy. Raoul didn't expect to see him so soon, as he was supposed to show up during the process of forming alliances. Spence Templeton, the academy's rector, explained that changes would be made to the curriculum. Raoul realized that the level of preparation required had to remain the same. Otherwise, he would have to sweat. Suddenly, he noticed a special award, but he had never heard of it, because he thought that the exam was only held for distribution into groups. The task was to get into the S-rank group, since the fencing department is divided into 5 groups. Only 60 students out of 600 can get into the S-rank group, so it will be easy. But is it worth trying harder? The guy doesn't even know what exactly the best student will receive, so he doesn't see the point. Jake told him the same thing, because the benefits included access to all library halls and a personal room. However, Raoul liked these benefits, and he decided that he could not miss such a chance. Listening to the lecture will increase your skill level, but will not award experience points or rewards. Raoul left his home and came here to meet a very important person. But having equipment to train vision magic changes everything, because he can gain experience points. The only problem is the cost of using magic, but if it's free, then there's nothing to worry about. The library is full of hidden objects. He will be able to get hidden tasks and skill books with the necessary information. He thought it would take him at least 3 years to take advantage of all the Academy's opportunities. But now he will save a lot of time, of course, if he can pass the exam better than everyone else. When the boy went outside, an unfamiliar voice called out to him, making him turn around. In front of him stood a red-haired guy with an arrogant look, who was interested in his family. It was obvious that this was another of Randall's offspring, but Raoul had never seen him before. The guy immediately stated that the rumors about his arrogance were true, which is why everyone calls his family creepy and ignorant. Not wanting to continue the conversation, Raoul turned away, because he didn't have time to figure out who he was. Randall wanted to stop him, but Jake immediately blocked his way with his huge hand. The man hinted in a menacing tone that no matter what family he belonged to, there was a limit to everything. However, the guy didn't like this and demanded that they get out of the way. But suddenly a subordinate stopped Randall. Ashton's brats are always driving him crazy, so he promised to show Raoul his place. After some time, the new students gathered in the middle of the courtyard, waiting for the ceremony. Among the students who came to support their family members, Raoul observed various famous personalities. There was Duke Marquis Templeton, the finest knight in the kingdom, who came to support Dalton. There was also Marcus Clifford, a mid-level axe master from the Marquis McNeil family, and also the increasingly popular Viscounty of Rendell, which supported Caleb. Many representatives of these families are already studying here and have great influence and probably run the entire academy. Meanwhile, Jake was pleased with the presence of beautiful ladies, understanding why Raoul was so eager to come here. Suddenly, the knight noticed that someone had come to support the Ashton family as well. Jake couldn't believe they were standing in the backyard, deciding to take care of it himself. Raoul decided to take a look at the rules and the list of first-year students. In their past lives, they were famous throughout the continent. Especially Dalton Templeton and James McNeil, they will reach master level in 10 years, and it will not be easy to beat them. The first test was about to begin, so the students were asked to go into a small classroom. Raoul understood that while they were still just children, first place would definitely be his. After some time, the entrance exam began, and the first test was a written test. Raoul did not prepare for the written test because the system's communications and community had all the necessary information. The second test was a test of physical strength, and they had to go to the training hall in groups. As soon as they crossed the threshold, everyone immediately felt a field restricting the flow of mana. They might not even try to use mana, since the test of physical strength takes place without its use. In front of them was a punching bag. The database listed a power meter, but there was no mention of a punching bag. The first student approached the measuring device and hit it with all his strength. Student number 202 scored 1,418 points. After which, the next student was called up. Of the two attempts, they record the highest results, with the average impact force reaching 1,000 to 1,500 units. This guy has 43 stamina and 50 strength, making him one of the top 5 in Raoul's group. When this guy hit it, the strength meter showed 2,250 points, which was the highest result to date. That guy was McNeil, who was very pleased with his result. He was the first to cross the 2,000 unit mark, which means Raoul now knows what result he should show. Meanwhile, in one of the offices, 12 judges were sitting at a long table evaluating the exam. They appreciated McNeil's good score, and their students set a high standard for the kingdom. Besides, the physical strength of children under 20 reaches more than 1,000 units, and representatives of the Leslie Kingdom will certainly amaze them all. Some were curious about what had prompted Gray to join them, but he only wanted to evaluate the effect of the new magic circle. It sounds like he's going to use students as test subjects, but he's not. He is happy to be here and see young talents, because he heard that many of them come from military families. Many people came to cheer for them, and now one of the judges is ready to introduce them to the 13th son of the Randall family. His name is Caleb, and Viscount McKinney Rendell was one of the judges, so he supported his relative. His lordship himself volunteered to train him, after which Caleb asked permission to join the academy. Everyone was eagerly awaiting his performance, and at that very second, the guy swung his arm to strike. He scored 3,005 points, which spoke of his incredible talent, and it was not for nothing that Count Rendell favored him. Other judges and relatives thought that it would take a lot of work to equal his strength. The next participant was James of the Marquis McNeil family, grandson of Lord Clifford. It was he who the knightly order wanted to recruit, because his talent went beyond the academy. Everyone was shocked when they noticed the 3612 unit mark, which was simply unthinkable. This was a new record and the highest result among first-year students in the history of the academy. It's surprising because even knights could barely get 3,000 when the power meter first appeared. Next to approach the strength meter was Dalton, the grandson of the sword master, and this was his first appearance in public. The guy was absolutely calm, and when he hit, he immediately scored 2.900 points. Some did not understand what was surprising, because the result was much lower than the previous one. However, they were told that the guy had struck with one hand from behind his back, without straining himself. He hit 3.008 on his second try, and was actually forced to go to the academy. But Dalton isn't too happy about it. A disgruntled Randall suggested taking a break for lunch, since the ratings were already clear and there was no point in continuing to watch. However, Gray was sure that there was still one young man left among the members of the famous families. Rumor has it that he only got into the academy thanks to his father's letter of recommendation, and he's only 15. Some students don't care about graduating from the academy. They come only to gain experience. However, for a member of a military family, this was a rather unfortunate incident. But suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by Dylan. Gray was glad to see the Earl of Ashton's son, who was a well-mannered and honest young man, but he couldn't forget such a strong man with a terrifying look, which was flattering for Dylan. One of the judges asked the newcomer to tell him what exactly made him laugh so much. Dylan was amused by their old-fashioned reasoning, because believing rumors without having your own opinion is rather egocentric. They claimed that Raoul came only to gain experience, but the reason was different. Randall doubted that his brother was capable of leaving a mark on the history of the academy, and Dylan just threw up his hands. He was also interested in Raoul's purpose in coming to the academy, as he had never spoken about it. One of the judges suggested not to create an awkward situation in front of the guests and to continue observing. Then they began to wait for the first-year student from the Ashton family to see his abilities. When Raoul stepped forward, the men noticed that the boy seemed to be emitting light, but they did not find any resemblance to Dylan. However, the man stated that this was indeed his little brother, the pearl of their family. Looking at his appearance, some men began to remember the unmarried girls in their families. It's not without reason that McKinney is straining himself so much. He knows about Raoul's skills after the incident with Baron Gendar. Caleb has probably already reported everything, and now the Viscount is trying to draw everyone's attention to his son. Now that the situation was heating up, Dylan hoped that Raoul would give it his all. At this time, the guy approached the dynamometer, after which he delivered the first blow. One of the men would have given him a perfect score if he had been able to evaluate the students on the test. On his first try, Raoul scored 2,999 units, stunning everyone present. Now the guy was preparing for the next blow, glad that everything was going according to plan. Many supported him and asked him to knock out more than 3,000, realizing that age is no obstacle to strength. At that, the students' relatives who were in the office immediately jumped up from their seats, rejoicing at his result. Dylan was also very pleased, as his brother beat the best score by 3 points, scoring 3,615 points. Now the man saw in him a smart guy who had really thought of everything in advance. A stunned silence fell over the room when they saw the points the boy had scored. Everything went according to plan, and the referee asked him to return to his place, praising his strike. He walked silently and sat down on the bench while everyone stared at him in shock. After this, Raoul opened the system and saw that he had scored the highest score of 2820 on the first test. He had to monitor the updates and record the scores, and at the end, enter the names of the students whose scores were above 2,500. When the guy finished, he hoped that no one noticed his strange actions. When he reached the expert level, his physical strength began to rapidly increase thanks to his brother's training. He could easily hit 4,000 on the meter, but he has to be at the level of a first-year student. Therefore, it was necessary to collect information and then pretend that I had made an effort. But in reality, he used telekinesis to soften the impact of the force. And the blow had to hit exactly the right spot, which he calculated using the system's calculator. He wasn't sure if all these actions were necessary, but for now, he should be more careful. Until other players appear, he will hide his true strength, especially his superpowers. It will be difficult for society to accept them. In his past life, as a gambler, Raoul openly used force. And this led to the guilds, having analyzed his skills, tracking him down, and he fled. The guy decided not to repeat this stupid mistake, but would lie low and quietly eliminate the enemies. Next, they will face an obstacle course, where the emphasis will be on strength and agility, where they will also need to control themselves. The guy hopes that this time, Dalton and James will give it their all, because he also wants to test his abilities. To be a descendant of the great sword master Duke Marquis is a great blessing. However, such a status comes with a fair share of responsibility, which fell to Dalton's lot. The Duke Marquis never forced the children to learn swordsmanship, but they decided to do everything possible to maintain their position. Dalton didn't like this kind of pressure, because his extraordinary talent required him to be the best, and he surpassed many of his peers, but since he was carefree by nature, constant competitions drove him crazy. So he decided to join the academy to escape the boring training. But at that very moment, he noticed that Raoul Ashton and James McNeil were in first place in the exam. Even though James won every sparring match they had, he was the better man he had ever fought. but someone was able to outshine him. While he was thinking about this, the judge asked everyone to line up to move on to the next test. Dalton caught a glimpse of Raoul out of the corner of his eye, remembering his name, and decided that he had seen him somewhere. Without thinking twice, he decided to approach him, while the guy immediately asked who he was. As Dalton introduced himself, he thought he saw a golden glint in the guy's eyes. Raoul decided that the conversation was over and decided to leave, but his interlocutor stopped him. Dalton was surprised because it had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him like that. Usually people were inclined to gain his favor by any means necessary. He was becoming increasingly curious about the look on Raoul's face when he defeated him. As the time approached for the third test, the first-year students arrived at the training ground. This test was too easy for Raoul, because their task is to run as fast as possible. But you need to do this while fully clad in steel armor and avoid obstacles along the way. Now another group was taking the test, and many students had already been disqualified. Although their skill level was low, 100 people's minds can't fail a test, and there's clearly something fishy going on here. Someone heard that outside Vice Rector Gray arrived. They made some changes, making it more difficult to pass. A little later, the best result of 9 minutes 12 seconds was set, although the difference was insignificant. Raoul was curious to see what the next group would show, and Dalton noticed that it was soon his turn. A few minutes later, the next group headed to the start. At this time, Raoul learned that the best result at the moment is 7 minutes. The judge began to explain the rules, that all traps were created using illusions, but they could cause damage. If the armor is not able to withstand the damage taken, then he is eliminated from the competition. When it was Raoul's turn, he ran forward at full speed, wanting to get off to a fast start. The armor he was wearing was old and difficult to move in, and it was understandable why many dropped out at the very beginning. But with an expert level, he will have no trouble completing the obstacle course. At that very second, the guy discovered the first obstacle. A turbulent stream of water with slippery stones. He wondered. It felt like a waste as he reached the second obstacle, the forest traps. Having stepped on the hidden slab, arrows were immediately fired at Raoul from behind the bushes. Spikes began to rise from the ground, but this did not stop the guy from moving forward without taking any damage. At that very moment, throwing knives flew towards him, which he deflected with his sword. The ground beneath him began to crumble, and he was informed that James and Dalton could complete the test within 5 minutes. Caleb Rendell was also quite a torture, but he didn't compare to the level of the first two. Having reached the bridge, Raoul ordered his comrades to continue observation and keep him informed of the progress of the others. If Raoul continued at the same speed, he might make it, but suddenly he felt the wind. The bridge began to sway violently, causing the guy to lose speed and balance. At that very second, the cannons began firing fireballs straight in his direction. He realized that he couldn't let them touch the bridge, and that the best solution was to fight them off. It would be much easier to fight back with a mana blade, but he can't draw it yet. However, this was more than enough, so he managed to overcome this obstacle. Now there is only one last test left. A cave that does not promise anything good. The traps here will be more difficult to avoid, and they also pose a greater danger than the others. However, Raoul must continue, and must find a way to reach the finish line first. Meanwhile, not only was he forced to enter the academy, but now he also had to study with these little people. He has already won a tournament where most of the participants were over 20, and he has experience serving in the capital's guard. If it weren't for the Lord's direct order, he wouldn't have set foot here, and these scions of the Dalton and Ashton families. His task is undoubtedly more important than their rivalry, but if he gives up first place to them, he will be a complete failure. While he was trying to figure out when this cave would end, he suddenly discovered an exit. Continuing to fight off the arrows, he ran as fast as he could towards the exit, and in the end, he arrived in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Having won, he was now simply obliged to take first place. But someone's voice immediately caught his attention. He turned around and noted with displeasure that Dalton had completed the race in 4 minutes, 58 seconds. This could not be, because even if all the obstacles and traps were removed, he would not achieve such a result. However, Dalton himself was completely calm and thought it was a good warm-up. While everyone else was praising him, McNeil realized that all his plans had gone down the drain. Meanwhile, Dalton was looking for Raoul, and the others didn't understand why he needed the Ashton family brat. He never cared about McNeil when they dueled, but he has some business with this guy. However, he did everything in his power. A 15-year-old boy who has not reached the expert level will not be able to beat this record. But at that very second, everyone noticed in shock that Raul had set a new record of 4 minutes 55 seconds. The freshman couldn't believe that this guy had beaten Dalton himself again. McNeil didn't understand how he did it, because this boy wasn't even an expert. This also caught Dalton's attention, and it seems that college life will not be as boring as he thought. Meanwhile, relatives watched in surprise as Raul again scored the highest score. Everyone present immediately began congratulating Dylan, who immediately felt awkward. It was an impressive performance, especially Raul's movement. Dylan explained with a smile that he was a special boy and had already mastered more than one skill. He had to answer something, although he himself was surprised to see how his brother had completed the obstacle course. James McNeil tore the traps apart by simply going head-on. The precise movements of Dalton's long blade resembled the techniques of the Marquis' swordmaster. Raul used a great two-handed sword, just like the Ashton clan's wall-mounted representatives, but his movements amazed everyone. And what's even more surprising is that he didn't trigger a single trap in the cave. Only seasoned wanderers or robbers possess such skill. Unlike James and Dalton, he didn't even use the mana sword, and hid the fact that he had reached the expert level. This was also noticed by Randall, who could use this information to annoy the guy in the future. Dylan felt hurt that his brother had lied to him, but now they had to have a serious man-to-man talk. But he is still proud of him, and is now incredibly happy that his brother was the best. The third test has ended, and the entrance exam has come to an end. After a long ordeal, Raul's brothers congratulated him on his victory, and he got into the carriage so as not to attract any more attention. It was tiring to hold back his strength, but fortunately, he managed to fool everyone. And since he has completed his task, he can now calmly lie low for a while. When he fell asleep, he dreamed of a scene from the past where he was holding Nikki in his arms, loudly calling out to Guildmaster Daesung. Khan Gilju just laughed, because the guy acted as if he had lost his family. He politely asked Do-hyun to join them. If he had agreed right away, this would not have happened. He currently occupies the first line of the ranking, but it is unlikely that he will be able to defeat them on his own. These people can't even imagine how much Nikki meant to him. They met while on a mission in the main scenario, and she has been his guide ever since. For more than a year, he cared for and protected her, during which time she became his family. And now she's dead, at the hands of a guild that has nothing to do with the scenario. The guild leader was pushing him to take risks, because he was going to kill him anyway. At that very moment, Do-hyun began to release energy, thereby tensing up the people around him. Everyone was stunned, because even for the #1 player, this is an incomprehensible power. Khan was angry because the damn guild had deprived him of skills, and he had invested too much in it. But now he stood helplessly in front of Do-hyun, who was pointing a knife at him. Now the guy was only interested in why his guild was killing guides. The man was speechless from fear, but the angry Do-hyun demanded an answer from him. It was important for him to know why they kill NPCs without fear of getting a penalty. It is not advantageous for the Ukrainian player to kill NPCs that influence the main scenario. In this case, his account is deleted permanently, and profiles associated with it are banned. Still, new ones come to take their place, and their death does not affect the course of the game, but they continue to take risks and take the lives of innocents. But this only made the man laugh, as he didn't care at all about any fines. Only the poor like him are afraid of him, but in reality, many people dream of killing the NPC for 10,000 won. Do-hyun demanded a clear answer, but Han knew that he would still be killed, and then he would return to the game. The guy had heard about him, the owner of one of the 5 richest companies in Korea, Daesung. He was sure that in life and in games, the one with more money always wins. That day, kneeling before the girl he could not protect, he made a promise. He was ready to do this just for her, spitting on the rules and moral standards. When Raul woke up from his sleep, he was surprised that for the first time, he dreamed about his past life. He felt sincerely sorry, because he was never able to keep his promise to the girl he loved. Suddenly, he noticed a message from the system, thanking players for using it. It also served as a notification of updates and schedules, with the update date listed at the end. Raul knew that it would come someday, which meant that they would soon meet again, and this time, he would not let her die. The problem is that he couldn't predict the exact time of the update, so his preparation leaves much to be desired. He only has a month left, but if he doesn't take this chance, he won't be able to carry out his plan anytime soon. Raul must take control of the scenarios and gain as many advantages as possible before other players appear. First, you need to improve the guild and expand its ranks. then visit the academic library. He had to plan out the schedule today and ended up spending the whole night sorting out the upcoming tasks. He still managed to draw up the most effective and accurate plan of action for the near future. Meanwhile, Silver Zero, the leader of the Imperial Hounds, began the meeting with the topic of the royal family. Also this morning, a message came from the main base. Exactly in a month, they will begin to implement their great plan. This was only the first stage, and we must not forget that now it is important to continue playing our roles. Number 7 declared the first stage complete, but due to the kingdom's interference, it is not easy to get to the battlefield. However, he is sure that the Randall family is also involved, although they have not taken any action. But the facts speak for themselves. That same day, the Randalls declared themselves heroes. The battle armor and other weapons with spells are clear evidence of their involvement. It's just completely unclear how they had the strength to carry out such an operation. However, the Duke's youngest son, Ashton, was present in the world at the time, although he was not seen near their base. The information is not confirmed, but one of their people saw a man who looked like Gray. Silver ordered the investigation to be suspended, as there was no point in wasting time on secondary tasks. Number 3 reported that there was an emergency at the academy, with the arrival of Raoul Ashton, who had taken first place. Number 6 was perplexed, because last year Raoul did not show any talent. But this year, he began to demonstrate excellent skills. However, it was doubtful that he would interfere with their plans, since he was only a 15-year-old boy. They also have one problem left to deal with, but they must get it all sorted out before their great plan begins. Everyone understood this perfectly well, because one random variable could threaten them with a major failure. The next day, Raoul, who had spent the night without sleep, arrived at the academy courtyard. He refused to live in a dormitory because it was more convenient for him to get to the academy by carriage and solve problems along the way. At this time, other students were discussing the guy and his recent achievements on the entrance exam. He decided that there was no point in wasting time on them, since the academy took up only a tiny portion of his journey. Now he only had a couple of problems to solve, when suddenly a notification caught his attention. The entrance exam results came in, and he was admitted to the S-rank group, taking first place. The task was completed, for which he received some experience points, 500 coins, and a bonus reward. The lectures were not as useful as he expected. Even though they were on optional subjects, they only taught the basics. His classmates avoided him, but this suited him perfectly, and Raoul was not against this development. The first day went well, but suddenly, a guy entered the classroom, announcing that he was looking for Raoul. He provided him with information about the benefits for achieving the best result. He needed to show it in the library. They also told him that the vice-rector was waiting for him and asked him to follow the guy. Alfredo is a significant figure in the history of Connecticut, a hero who led the fight against the Empire. Raoul was glad of this opportunity, but at the same time worried, because he didn't know what to expect from this conversation. When the guy entered his office, the man greeted him with a smile while sitting at his desk. Gray asked him to wait a little, as he needed to finish the paperwork. Raoul meets him face-to-face for the first time. He seems like a typical aristocrat, but in fact there is an unusual aura surrounding him. However, the guys wanted to know more, to take a quick look at his status, but he immediately froze. The information was unavailable to him, only the well-known facts. But suddenly, Gray pulled him out of his stupor. He is busy with work, but at the same time, he behaves as if he knows all his actions in advance. Raoul apologized to him and bowed, because he had heard that it was very difficult to find a meeting with him. However, the man also wanted to ask him about many things, including the skill of his keen eye. At that moment, the guy froze again with a burnt look, trying to understand who this old man was. It was unclear whether he knew that Raoul had the skill of keen eye or was simply making an assumption. The guy felt uneasy and decided to choose his words more carefully, while the man decided to make tea. At first, he thought that Gray would knock him down with magic, but he was wrong, and he did everything manually. Alfredo then congratulated him on his first place in the exams and decided to ask him a few questions. Their first meeting took place on the test site, but Raoul did nothing of the sort that time. The boy frowned, asking why such a great magician like him was interested in him. In response, the man asked if he knew about an organization called the Imperial Pathfinders. 50 years ago, due to the invasion of the Crane Empire, the continent of Connecta was plunged into chaos. In the most difficult times, heroes came to the rescue. Risking their lives, they tried to stop the Empire. They managed to drive their opponents behind the mountain of monsters, and then peace reigned for half a century. and all conflicts were resolved. However, they decided to prepare in case of another invasion. Gray built a tower to train talented people, in search of which he traveled across the continent, and one of them was the alchemist Nakia, whom Raoul saved. Gray had enough power to solve her problem of being expelled from the association, but he failed. He was busy with an extremely important matter, and rumors reached him that the association had forgiven the girl all her sins. Then he came to Mira to make sure of this, and became a witness to the noble deed of Raoul and his guild. Gray, who is really behind the capture of the secret Imperial Pathfinder base, and the Rindell family took credit for the success. In order not to attract the attention of the Empire, Raoul refused the honors, giving the title of savior to another family. Alfredo decided that he was perfect for the role of the hero of this world and wanted to observe him more. Whatever the reason for calling him, the boy had to remain on guard, but he didn't know what to say about the Imperial Rangers. Gray used to constantly create quests related to the Crane Empire, but Raoul can't mention the Empire. The man noticed that the boy was acting cautiously, because such questions should be answered with silence. Since his stay in the world, thanks to his outstanding skills, he has skillfully resolved all conflicts. The guy didn't understand how he knew this, because if the Randalls found out that he set them up, he would be in trouble. Gray promised not to tell his secret, because the guy made a choice to remain anonymous. Raoul suggested that the Crane Empire was dangerous because it had a strong army. But if you dig deeper, the Empire exceeds other states in terms of territory and population. The Empire covers a large area, but most of the land is uninhabited. Due to the harsh climate, the population is the same as in one of the kingdoms. Their advantage is that they possess information that no one knows about them, while they themselves are in plain sight. The Empire is located behind a mountain of monsters and a prohibitive barrier, and the path to it passes through a gorge. They built a wall, which was always guarded by warriors, ready to prevent the invasion of enemies. But the spies still managed to get into the kingdom, which means the Empire has a great advantage over them. In a past life, this is what happened. The Empire unleashed a war, and by the time Raoul died, it was already close to victory. Gray then concluded that the kingdom needed people like Raoul. He was their secret weapon. Perhaps Nakia achieved greatness in her past life thanks to Gray. If so, his help could come in handy. By accepting his offer, the guy will quickly improve his skills and crush the Empire. Big changes are coming soon, and he must keep a low profile, making only wise decisions. Gray decided to say goodbye at this point, and in gratitude, asked to be allowed to give the guy a gift. He will need it in the future, and the instructions for use are inside. Opening the box, Raoul noticed a ring that looked quite expensive and was also imbued with mana. The guy doubted his acceptance, but Gray asked him to take it as a reward. After this, Raoul thanked the man, to which he received a polite reciprocation. It turned out that he had worried for nothing, and the meeting went much better than he expected, and he even received a gift. Suddenly, the guy realized that it was Gray's polymorphic ring, thanks to which the owner's body takes on the desired shape. It was an item that gave superpowers, which Raoul was very happy about and immediately put it on. Until this point, his status had limited him in many ways, and he lacked an object that could hide his identity. This spell belongs to the magic of the Sixth Circle. Moreover, it can summon the great sage Gray. However, there is no need to worry. Alfredo has been a great support to him, and he will use his gift wisely. 2 weeks later, life at the academy was going on as usual. Raoul had made no enemies, and everyone was friendly. But Dalton stuck to him like a leopard and followed him around 24/7, which was a little annoying. The guy always refused him, but he was not going to back down and tried to establish a relationship with him. I thought I would be able to study peacefully until Dalton appeared on the horizon and started sitting next to me all the time. Dalton turns out to be quite the pest, but he doesn't start fights. And thanks to his company, other students don't bother him. Raoul decided to take a break from him in the library, which noticeably irritated the clingy guy. Then he said, one of the privileges granted to a student for winning the exams is access to every floor of the library. But in reality, it turned out that the passage beyond the 4th floor was closed. Only royalty could get to the 5th floor. But this doesn't upset him. Even the doors of the 3rd floor are open to 50 students at most. It's time to look for valuable copies. At this time, a fairy was flying between the rows, seeing familiar faces, and not a single first-year student, and all the books were old. At first, she wanted to find something new by rummaging through the students' bags, but suddenly she noticed the girl. She always worked tirelessly, and so the fairy decided to reward her by casting a spell. She was pleased to see diligent students, and the students smiled unconsciously. At that very second, the fairy noticed the sleeping guy and immediately hit him, waking him up from his impudent sleep. The frightened student decided it was a ghost and ran towards the exit, screaming loudly. The keeper of the sacred library was not going to let him get away with such behavior. Meanwhile, Raoul noticed that there were many more useful skill books on the second floor than on the first. Suddenly, he overheard other students talking about how a guy got a good slap on the back of the head from a ghost. The guy suggested that she had cast a protective spell on the library because how could ghosts come here? Flying over the tables, the fairy decided that today many students were trying to irritate her. Suddenly, she felt a familiar heaviness, even though only 6 months had passed since her move. Then she realized that this book would no longer help her relieve her fatigue, and she would have to look for a new home. A high-grade spellbook can provide her with shelter for about 1,000 years, and now she needs a book of the same level. However, the shelves here are filled with only low-quality publications. It will never survive in such conditions. But the fairy also decided that she had one cherished wish left, and she felt that something special was coming. Suddenly she froze in shock, discovering a lonely guy whom she had never seen before. Next to him was an unusual book that could help the fairy find a new home. Meanwhile, Raoul was trying to find the unique skill book, but it wasn't that easy. He hoped to get at least one book on telekinesis. Even the knowledge he got from another psychokineticist couldn't help him. He needed more information, when suddenly a suitable book caught his eye. C-rank equestrian acrobatics that talked about martial arts. A wonderful compensation for the artistic skill of the brush touch that he had stumbled upon earlier. Since there are restrictions on saving skills, he must delete the old one to add the new one. However, this rule does not apply to unused skills, which could be considered a loophole. After he started to take out the skill book, skill decks immediately began to glow and absorb the information. Once the content is added to the skill decks, the book itself becomes useless and can be picked up by any other player in the same way. He needs to extract more skills. While it lasts, Raoul must continue his search. And his preferences are strange. More creators, the power of time, a unique style. They stand out from the crowd. In her eyes, this young man was unusual because he was knowledgeable about such books and he was also handsome. But it doesn't matter because he still can't save her. Only great sages and archmages are able to interact with her. It owes its existence to numerous victims, harsh fate, and a combination of circumstances. Despite their uniqueness, these books do not suit her. She felt something, but her intuition clearly fails her. But at the same moment, the fairy froze in surprise, trying to understand what this guy was doing now. At first glance, this book doesn't seem like much, but the symbol on the cover says otherwise. However, the book had not changed at all, and the fairy had seen such a spell for the first time, wanting to take a closer look. When Raoul left, the fairy had a chance. She had never had such houses before. Maybe she found what she was looking for. She slowly touched the book, but froze in surprise, because nothing happened. Even the great book of spells and the sacred manuscript told her their stories and allowed her to stay. However, she decided not to give up and continue trying, but nothing worked. At that moment, a guy approached her. She was genuinely frightened when Raoul asked in bewilderment why she sat on his book. He tried to figure out what kind of creature it was, and why it looked like it was about to disappear. Meanwhile, the fairy was shocked that the guy could see her, and Raoul did not understand what was surprising about this. Unable to bear this, the girl immediately turned around and tried to run away, but the guy decided not to catch up with her. She was interested in skill decks, so she will return to him herself, but now it is more important to find skills for him. Meanwhile, mounted acrobatics was added to the skill decks, and the skill level of skills that increased effectiveness was increased by 10.5%. He currently has about 700 skills in stock, scattered in a chaotic manner. Even in his past life, no one has accumulated so many. However, skill decks is still considered a rare item, and it is unclear how many books still need to be collected. At that very moment, the escaped fairy, looking out from behind the table, turned to him, asking what kind of book it was. At first, he decided to be stricter with her, and decided to first hear an apology for touching other people's things. The fairy immediately began to apologize, but was again surprised that he actually heard her, which was very strange. For some reason, she decided not to ask for forgiveness, but instead asked permission to introduce herself. Her name is Ravelina Harriet Murdian, but he can call her Ravel. She is a forest fairy. She loves harmony and order. Raoul introduced himself to her, noting that she did not look like an ordinary fairy, but rather like a ghost, just a soul that is on the border between life and death, an entity that does not obey the laws of the familiar world. She was attracted by his unique book, which could not be compared even with the most special books she had encountered before. She didn't respond to her call, but Ravel was confident in her observations, so she asked to take a peek inside her. The guy also knew a little about skill decks. Perhaps Ravel would be able to improve it, escape with it, and still not succeed. Raoul agreed, in exchange for the promise that the fairy would tell him everything he knew about the book. Touching her, Ravel smiled and told her that an incredibly strong flow of energy was passing through her. But suddenly there was a bright flash, which surprised the fairy, because this usually did not happen. Ravel thought that he had foreseen this situation, but the appearance of this book in their time was against the rules. Looking at her reaction, Raoul turned to her with concern, seeing fear in the little girl's eyes. She immediately flew up to him and asked where he found this book, although they had agreed that she would provide him with the information. This book has the power of the creator god, and of a complex ancient creator who is listed as missing. These words stunned the guy, who looked at the shining skill decks and could not believe his ears. At first the guy was stunned, but then his face slowly began to change to a thoughtful one. This information didn't mean much to him, and Ravel was surprised that he didn't know the creator god himself. She didn't find out the details, since she only managed to take a quick look, but it was a banned publication that had lost its validity. She didn't know how to return the book to its original state, because it was being capricious and refusing to talk to her. Looking at his face, Ravel was surprised that he wanted to get answers to all the questions so quickly, so she asked permission to go inside. When an urgent task appeared, Raoul realized that the fairy was trying to find a warm place for herself, but this was to his advantage. But he decided to act cunningly, and declared that he could solve the problem with skill decks himself, without letting Ravel in. Since it was already late, it was time for him to return home, and this news stunned the fairy. Ravel wanted to stop him, but the guy had things to do and he offered to talk later, although he doubted he would return. The girl immediately began to apologize to him because she had not spoken to the man for a long time and had forgotten about the rules of decency. Raoul decided to put some more pressure on her, and the fairy promised to be helpful because she really needed this book. The guy thought that this was enough, and now she is ready to negotiate on his terms. At that very second, the fairy began to cry, being in despair, after which she began to ask why he believed her. Raoul did not expect such a turn of events and asked her to calm down, but Ravel sobbed loudly, not allowing her to say a word. He apologized because he didn't want to bring her to tears, and at that very second the fairy suddenly calmed down and sat down on the book. To begin with, he asked her to tell him everything that had happened and how she had ended up in such a hopeless situation. Ravel nodded and agreed to tell him because she trusted him, but it would be a long story. Long ago, Connect was engulfed in a great war between various races, including gods, demons, and extraterrestrial entities. The continent was under threat of destruction, and the forest fairies were on the verge of extinction. And then her relatives tried to save her, the youngest then the crown, imprisoning her in a book, placing their last hope. But due to a disruption in the mana flow, her soul was trapped in the book, and her appearance disappeared into a spatial crack. Every time she woke up, she lost some of her memories, but she knew for sure that she had a duty. She must find the other forest fairies scattered throughout the world, because she is sure that she is not the only one left alive. But Ravel is locked in the world of books, unable to leave the library. But from Raoul's book, she smells the same scent that came from her first book. Her story touched the guy, but he decided to pause for a moment before giving a final answer. Raoul allowed the fairy to enter her, but she would have to become her manager, which meant she would be connected to him. The girl would do anything for the opportunity to stay in it, but she was interested in why he needed this book. She needs it to protect her family and homeland. Perhaps for her it is an empty phrase, but for him, it is very important. However, the girl considered this an excellent goal, and then took his hand and suggested that they work together. She can hardly help him right now, and she needs some time to settle in. It will go into hibernation for about a month, but the book will continue to function as before. As soon as Ravel wakes up, she will help him in any way she can, after which she says goodbye to him for a month. As she lay down on the book, Skildex rose into the air, taking in the fairy, who had finally found a new home. That's how Raoul met his new comrade. After meeting Ravel, time flew by, and there was only a week left until the update. He still had so much to prepare, and time was running short, while Dylan praised his brother for his efforts. He also mentioned that Raoul was right about the oracle from the temple, but was surprised how he knew about it. However, the prophet said that within a week the things that had disappeared would return to their places, and the broken connections would be restored. The temple reacted calmly, only strengthening its army to prepare for the coming danger. Most of the nobility ignored it or took it as a joke, because if it weren't for Raoul, he would have ignored the prophecy too. It is no wonder that the wind of the Holy Empire is ruled by the Pope, and the Holy Empire is a small alliance of states. It includes Garnelia and several medium-sized cities, but bears the imperial title due to its religious influence. Raoul was afraid that the prophecy would come true, and they would not have time to prepare for it. But Dylan was confident that they would do everything in their power. At that very moment, his brother asked him to take care of his worries and offered to train to see his wonderful skills. When Raoul told his brother about the renewal, making it sound like it was a prophecy, he took his words seriously. But once he admitted his telekinesis, he began constantly asking to demonstrate his abilities. During training, Dylan asked him not to rely on skills, but to focus on building physical strength. Raoul thought he would never get used to the hellish training his brother provided him with. He also improved his psychokinetic body to the level he had in his past life. Dylan is obsessed with increasing his physical strength, but despite his magnificent body, he has many gaps in his fighting skills. When the war begins, the enemies they face will not be easy to overcome, but Dylan must work on himself. Properly honed combat skills combined with his insane strength will make him a killing machine. Dylan knows that with each sparring session, Raoul is getting closer to his level. And soon, he noticed that muscle wouldn't be enough. Then he will choose a suitable ability for it, and when the dungeon opens, he will write more skill books. Not only Raoul, but also the people around him will become stronger. That's his grand plan. Preparations for the update were almost complete. But the guy was still uneasy that people were taking the prophecy too calmly. None of the aristocrats lifted a finger, and he would really need the kingdom's help in carrying out this scenario. The invasion of monsters and the war with the Empire cannot be avoided without the assistance of the army. The government is obliged to take care of this. However, there were things in this world that Raoul could not influence in any way, and he could only hope for the prudence of the higher ranks. Although he knows about the future, his possibilities are not unlimited because he is only a 15-year-old boy. Raoul decided to focus on what he could control, going to lectures and reading skill books in the library. And when there were no classes, he visited 3 more free cities where everyone was stunned by his appearance. These were the cities of the Kingdom of Reuben: Zusk in the north, Kasan in the east, and Bryant in the west. Using a letter of recommendation from Mira, the guy met with mayors of other cities and offered to invest in them. He began implementing large-scale construction projects in the center of each city and created branches of the first guild. He also posted advertisements in the free cities and the capital for recruitment of mercenary soldiers of rank C or higher. According to the contract, he promised to pay double the salary in the first month and also gave the chance to join the guild. There were many people willing to accept such a generous offer, so he recruited guys of rank B and 950 rank C. The latter were trained soldiers from other lands, or self-taught with 3 years of experience. Spent about 30,000 gold, but it will take even more to maintain them. However, meanwhile, people were surprised by the guy's wealth, while others decided that he was up to something and was simply deceiving everyone. Philip contacted the guild members, and in addition to the leaders, 45 members arrived, split into 10 groups, completing the training. Raoul praised him for his good work and asked him not to let his guard down, as they had an important mission ahead of them today. 6 newcomers reached the expert level and were promoted to ordinary knights, while Philip, Jake, and Pierce became elite knights. He selected talented guys, but they exceeded all his expectations, and it was interesting to see how they would perform in the future. Raoul has done everything possible to prepare for the update, and now all that remains is to wait. The only hope was that everything would go according to plan, and there were just under 10 hours left until the update. At this time, Silver Zero was informed that the royal family was not taking any special action, but had only increased patrols. The Templetons share the same position as the McNeils, which has unnerved the mystery man. The Ashtons were not believers, They maintained good relations with the temple, but did not adhere to religion. Since they started preparing even before the oracle's announcement, it is possible that they have another source of information. Gray, meanwhile, was focused only on the academy, and also did not take any action. Number 8 was supposed to infiltrate the mercenary soldiers' response, but during their attempt, they failed. Many were surprised because it was a recruitment for 1,000 fighters, and not a single one of these guys was able to pass. This guy showed results that were too high for a first-year student, and could have been hiding some other trump cards. He could be a problem for them, but he doesn't have any particular advantages, and all these nobles won't interfere with their plan. However, it is worth keeping an eye on him while all their agents are in their positions. Soon they will carry out their grand plan and put an end to these noble degenerates once and for all. The subordinates immediately supported their leader, while he, in turn, thought only about Raoul Ashton. Meanwhile, in the city, a woman was walking with her son, when suddenly the boy pointed curiously at the sky. Looking up, she discovered a huge number of bright flashes that looked like shooting stars. At first, the woman thought so, but at that very second, fear was clearly visible in her eyes. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to shake, and people began to scream in panic, trying to find shelter. The woman hugged her son, wanting to protect herself, when suddenly she raised her head and saw a huge gate in front of her. The people froze in bewilderment, trying to understand what it was, but at that very second, goblins began to appear from the gates. However, they didn't have time to reach the woman, as Jake stood between them, destroying the first monster. He immediately announced to everyone that it was not safe here, and ordered them to hide in a safe place. A gate was discovered near Outer Wall Number 4, Zone B, Sector 32, and the knights were taking defensive measures. Jake immediately gave the order to evacuate the residents to a safe place and hold the defense to the last. Near the other outer wall, a gate also opened. Several monsters entered their territory, but there were no casualties. Philip also announced the gates. You have already started to resolve the situation, but control of the zone will be transferred to the guards. Requests for reinforcements came from all over the city, but no one was able to keep up with what was happening. Raoul, who was sitting in front of the map, gave everyone instructions, trying to correctly distribute the forces of his people. The update he had been so carefully preparing for over the course of a month had arrived. At that very moment, the boy called Bernard, who immediately appeared at his call, ready to carry out the order. The guy ordered to select several warriors from the first attachment and distribute them among sectors. He knew the event was about to happen, but he didn't expect it to be on such a large scale. Their training proved insufficient, and they were barely coping, losing many good soldiers. Raoul lacked information from the very beginning, and he tried to compensate for this with rigorous training. All he knew was that the kingdom had suffered greatly from the gates in 512, but their number, location, and rank remained unknown. The guy would like to clean them out himself, but now he is not alone. He has loyal assistants. By using the power of his guild, he will be able to minimize civilian casualties. If only the boy knew his brother's rank, he would be able to approach the distribution of troops more rationally. At that very moment, a limited task appeared, and its goal was to close as many gates as possible. Raoul was stunned by the fact that the gate was renewed every midnight, giving them no peace. He did not expect that this could not be avoided, although there were suspicions about such a development of events. Connect has a protection system that can interrupt the game if the scenario becomes compromised. She may make an additional request, as happened now, but usually she simply sends a sudden task. In other words, no matter how many gates he closes, it all makes no sense. It will not be easy, but he will not give up. Raoul must find a way to minimize possible damage while trying not to lose capable fighters. At that very moment, he received a notification that a golden gate had been discovered near Outer Wall Number 2. So far, everything is quiet, but the energy emanating from them is gradually increasing, and the air is getting hotter. Raoul gave the order not to approach the gate, as it could be swallowed up by a parallel dimension. He realized that he couldn't just stay here and give orders anymore, and had to figure this out himself. Meanwhile, the story took us to a guy named Josh, who, having left the walls of his native company, worked hard to become a mercenary soldier. A nobleman was recruiting knights, and he jumped at the chance to become one of them. They were provided with comfortable housing. He had never eaten such delicious food in his life, which made him very happy. He thought he would enjoy an ordinary life, adapting to the whims of a nobleman, but he was not ready for this. There was no end in sight, and the boy felt that he couldn't last long. He urgently needed help. At the same second, behind the ordinary rats, their leader, who was several times larger, came out. Now this big guy is joined in, and at this rate, he won't be able to fight them off any longer. You'll have to play big, destroying the big guy, and then the others will fall or run away in fear. But as soon as Josh rushed forward, various weapons appeared out of nowhere, piercing the rats. Raoul arrived just in time, smiling and asking the guy if he had disturbed him. Josh looked very familiar, so Raoul assumed he was from the first guild, but he denied it. He saw him as an ambitious guy, but it was risky, because such a beast was not easy to defeat. Although he was capable, he would still have trouble dealing with a D-rank gate, so he offered to join them. Josh was confused, so he decided to ask who they were to offer something like that. Jake, who had just arrived, noticed the newcomer and said that he was obliged to know his master by sight. Before him now stood the master of the first guild, Raoul Ashton, who was fighting alongside his subordinates. If Josh thought that since the guild was created by the Count's son, he was guaranteed a sweet life, then in that case, he didn't belong here. They employ only professionals in their field, so you need to keep up the good work and imitate them. After this, Raoul gave the order to get ready, ask for help from Luck, which they needed. Looking at the confident expression on the master's face, Josh realized that they were professionals in their field. Meanwhile, the monsters emerging from the gate looked around uncertainly, hoping to find some prey. They were very surprised when they noticed a guy who was rushing towards them at full speed. Raoul, he doesn't have enough time to clear all the gates at once, and it needs to be done as soon as possible. Jake thought that their base was somewhere nearby, and Raoul suggested sending a scout. Saving the residents was their top priority, and at that very moment, the guy was surprised to see Josh rush forward. The guy ran straight into the thick of the enemies, waving a sword, destroying the monsters with all his anger. Raoul and Jake concluded that this guy has no brakes, but he fights with dignity. He needs to, by taking control of mana, he would achieve better results. And Raoul was willing to teach him this. At that very moment, one of the knights reported that they had discovered the rat's base behind the forest, which was good news. However, Jake explained that they had made sure to clear all the inhabitants away from the gate, so there shouldn't be one. And yet it's worth checking the surroundings again, because today, they're supposed to leave without losses. The primary objective is to save civilians, so Raoul ordered Josh to go with him to the base. They have a long night ahead of them today, so each of them must be prepared for any surprises. The next day, Dylan noticed that his brother was feeling pretty shaky, and it looked like it was time for them to resume training. However, now was not the time for jokes. So the guy asked how things were going back home. The man asked not to worry, as they had enough data to prepare well. They had about 100 brothers open, 10 of which were D rank, so they handled it without any problems. However, Raoul was stunned by this figure, because everything turned out to be much worse than he expected. But this surprised Dylan. The guy was determined to come and help him, but immediately received the answer that they had already closed them. It took them about half a day. The father got a good workout, and the Golden Bear Master Trevor and Commander Ernest also fought. Everyone hearing this news, Raoul only chuckled nervously, because until the very end, he doubted that they would be able to cope without him. Dylan found it funny to watch the old people having fun from the sidelines, and the guy remembered that his family wasn't the most adequate. Although there were no casualties, they acted too recklessly because the D-rank gate is too dangerous. However, Ashton is a powerful county. He and his father are far from weak, so he doesn't have to worry about them. They are always ready to fight back against the enemy, and are capable of dealing with any number of gates of any complexity. The Ashtons have enormous power, and don't need any help. They can easily close even several hundred gates. While Raoul was trying to comprehend his brother's words, he called out to him, tearing him out of his thoughts. He asked him not to worry about the house, and just do what he had to do, and he and his father would take care of everything. The guy smiled and nodded confidently, saying that he had doubted the strength of his family in vain, as they were ready for anything. He apologized to Dylan because he had acted too arrogantly, and his brother only confirmed this with a smile. The man added that some of the gates did not disappear after they were cleared, and something could have influenced this. Raoul was stunned to hear this, because all the gates should have disappeared after the cleansing. A little later, the guy gathered his people to discuss the impossibility of destroying all the gates. Dylan reported that the E and D rank gates, unlike the others, did not disappear, although they did cause some damage. However, what they had feared so much had happened, and now Something had to be done about it. If they increase surveillance, they will have to reduce the security force. So the issue needs to be resolved as soon as possible. Raoul promised that he would try to find out the reason why the gate does not disappear and find a way out. Bernard offered to prepare a squad, but Raoul decided to take only 3 of his best fighters, Philip, Jake, and Pierce. Ashton County seniors are working hard, so they can't sit back. They would probably encounter survivors, so he needed to send 10 soldiers to the gate, which is what he ordered Bernard to do. It brought back memories of the old days for Jake, but others reminded him that it had only been 2 months. Everyone present was in a serious mood, so they reminded the knight that this was not a picnic, but he was only joking. A little later, Raoul and his small team stood near the golden gates, fighting off a horde of monsters. There were bodies strewn around them, but the knights claimed they hadn't even warmed up yet. But they didn't have any extra time, so they had to speed up, because this wasn't the only gate. The team began swinging their blades even faster and more furiously, destroying the monsters one after another. Jake enjoyed the battle, but because of the weak opponents, he found it boring. However, one goblin wanted to attack him from behind, but the archer covered the gaping knight in time. Pierce asked him not to thank him, because he knew that this goblin could have done something bad if the knight hadn't noticed him. But Jake immediately started yelling at him because he was doing just fine on his own, but Pierce just ignored him. However, this only angered the man further, who offered to bet on who could kill more monsters. Meanwhile, Raoul thought that there was nothing remarkable here other than the rugged terrain. At this time, Josh approached him and also decided to join his team. He reported that the area was quite difficult to navigate, but nothing out of the ordinary had been discovered. Apparently, the gates are designed in such a way that only players can approach them, and this is quite possible. Non-player characters are also capable of clearing gates or dungeons because they are significantly stronger than players. However, the latter would not be satisfied with such an arrangement, so there are certain prohibitions. NPCs are not allowed to cross the gate and fight against the keeper, and they are also blocked from entering the dungeon boss room. No matter how strong the NPC is, unlike the player, he will not be able to close the gate on his own. At that moment, a secret mission appeared before the guy, but now he didn't have time for it. The rest, they themselves must find the gatekeeper, and it is unlikely that they would meet him among the monsters. Suddenly, Josh turned to the master, asking if the monster could be a guardian. Turning his head, Raoul was surprised to notice the cursed dark goblin who was the guardian of the E rank. Philip confirmed the guy's guess, looking at the monster who was calmly walking towards them. It was very convenient that the big guy fell into their hands on his own, and they didn't even have to look for him themselves. Josh asked to take over to sort it out, but Raoul wouldn't let him do it. He decided to finish him off himself and asked everyone to disperse while taking out his sword. Jake didn't understand what had happened to the young master, but Philip didn't understand his surprise, because the master always led the battle. It's just that if the guardian is destroyed by an NPC, there is no reward, although it's unlikely that an E-rank gate will be of any use. However, it was worth trying now because destroying the boss would not be in vain. Even if it was small, there would be a reward. The guy hoped that if you dealt with the guardian alone, the gate would close, but at that very second, the goblin attacked. Reacting instantly, Raoul deflected the mace with his sword, thereby upsetting the monster's balance. Taking advantage of the moment, the guy swung his blade sharply, cutting through the goblin's stomach, causing him severe pain. The knights watching them understood that for the master, this was a piece of cake. But Josh could not find words to express his delight. He repelled the attack and at the same moment retreated the necessary distance to create a gap. It became clear to Raoul what the E-rank gatekeepers were like. It would be difficult for inexperienced fighters to defeat them. Once the keeper is defeated, the gate should disappear, and at that very moment a notification appears in front of him. But suddenly, an error occurred, and the forced mode was activated, disrupting the order of the gate's disappearance. A little later, the guy showed his team the ore stone, which was the core of the power armor. He got it from the heart of a goblin, and now they must collect as much of it as possible to create their power armor. Jake didn't realize at first how valuable the thing was, but Pierce, looking displeased, quickly explained it to him. Raoul glanced at the gate, thinking that the guardians had been destroyed, but they remained in place, and there was no going against the script. However, he had no intention of doing this, and with each appearance of the gate, he would only become stronger. Now their task is to clear all the D-rank gates in the capital. They will have to work without breaks, so they need to try not to fall asleep. They needed one more person, so Raoul immediately invited Josh to join them. This time, he didn't give him a chance to prove himself, so he offers him a new opportunity. The guy was sincerely grateful for this chance and immediately agreed, after which the team set off. When Raoul was the first to enter the gate, he was surprised to find a rather ordinary cave. He was glad that the gate was glowing, because without that light there would be pitch darkness here, making it difficult to navigate. He didn't expect this, but he took something with him that might make their task a little easier. His comrades immediately started to emerge from behind him, and the guy ordered them not to disperse too far because it was dangerous here. Taking a lamp from his inventory, Raoul suggested looking around and searching for something interesting. The knights were surprised when they saw a magic lamp in his hands, because they are very rare, and they had never seen one before. Raoul ordered to explore the cave, but to stick together and not to scatter in case they had to fight. This was Josh's first mission, so he was ordered to carry the lamp, which he was very nervous about because it was a precious item. However, the guy gives it to him because he trusts him, and if he wants to join the first guild, he needs to try. Josh immediately realized that this was his chance, so he promised to protect this lamp with his own life. Raoul smiled, pleased that he had been too lucky to find such a guy. Josh will soon reach S rank and be considered a possible candidate for a mercenary position at the king's side. At that very moment, Pierce reported that he saw many moving objects somewhere ahead. The only thing he could say for sure was that they were emitting a hostile aura and were heading towards them. At that very second, the archer reacted and pulled the bowstring, releasing an arrow charged with mana somewhere into the darkness. Jake immediately started asking if he had hit the target, but everyone knew Pierce would hit the target even with his eyes closed. At that very moment, the archer announced that they were close, and then a huge flock of bats appeared in front of them. Raoul loudly ordered everyone to be careful, because they would definitely attack as soon as they saw the light. Josh realized that he was the source of the light, after which the animals immediately surrounded him. Everyone gathered around the lamp, and Raoul ordered him to throw it away so as not to get hit. However, this only further enraged the boy, who began swinging his sword, fighting off the pack. He destroyed the mice one after another, leaving them no chance, while he moved at lightning speed. Apparently he was inspired by Raoul's words, but they couldn't do with someone energetic. So now he was taking the entrance test. His comrades immediately began to encourage him, offering to deal with him himself if he wanted to join their team. While they were busy with support, they did not notice how a huge insect appeared behind them. After some time, they continued on their way, but found nothing but bats, even though the gate was D rank. Now they just needed to follow the young master's example, not to let their guard down, and be on their guard. Suddenly, Josh decided to turn to Philip, asking how strong their master was. He is becoming stronger every day and also belongs to the noble Ashton family. However, judging solely by his swordsmanship, he is inferior to Jake, which at first seems surprising. Seeing his comrade's strange behavior, the knight explained to the newcomer that he might look stupid, but was an excellent fighter. At that very moment, the entire team sensed something was wrong, and Philip immediately let the master know about it. However, Raoul already knew about this, watching the armored scorpions that were heading towards them. They looked quite ugly, but Philip urged everyone to be careful because there were too many of them. Raoul knew that there were more than just bats hiding behind the D-rank gate. This type of scorpion only lived in this dungeon. The scorpions are part of the mission and must complete it at all costs. They have tough armor and a poisonous sting that must be avoided. After this, the guy began to concentrate his mana, inviting the others to begin the battle. This mission was to eliminate, not capture, the enemy, but there was no mention of the destruction of the gate. First, they needed to deal with the monsters that surrounded them, and only then think about what to do next. Raoul was the first to enter the battle, swinging his blade and confidently sending the scorpions to the next world. The others tried to keep up with him, while Josh was unhappy with the fact that the monsters were constantly sticking to him. He reacted in time to the scorpion that was running at him from behind, and managed to cut it down with his sword. However, he understood that he would not have time to dodge the second one, but Raoul's flying blades immediately came to his aid. He was surprised by the floating swords, then looked at Raoul, who noted that fighting and keeping an eye on the lamp was not an easy task. But now the guy was once again taking away his opportunity to prove himself, and from that moment on, the lamp would be under his protection. Jake watched with a bored expression as the gentleman dealt with the monsters on his own, even though he had hoped to stretch his legs. Josh was surprised because he heard that Raoul was only 15, but he was clearly not one of those aristocrats who only pretended to be knights. Meanwhile, Raoul dealt with 50 monsters, which was the minimum requirement to clear the gate. When he finished, he ordered the others to move on, although they thought the task was over. But since they're here, they need to get to the end. It's dangerous to abandon a D-rank gate halfway. Jake was initially happy that they would finally get out of this cave, but Philip asked him to stop whining. The minimum requirement has been met, but the hidden quest to destroy the gate has not yet appeared. At that, the archer reported that he had reached the end of the cave and discovered something interesting. However, he was sure that it would be better for them to see the place where she had brought him with their own eyes. The huge arena was located right in the middle of the cave, which made this gate look very strange. When the whole group reached the archer, they all noticed the same guardian in the center of the arena. The strange thing was that he didn't move at all, as if he was waiting for them to come to him. It was a D-rank gatekeeper, a level 67 Scorpion champion who looked like a dangerous opponent. For Raoul, it looked funny because he invited them to a fight and they were obliged to accept the challenge. Everyone looked very worried when they noticed that their master began to descend, heading towards the arena. He apologized to his comrades, after which he confidently and gated towards the keeper. He would definitely have to sweat here, but this time he would not give in. And now it was not only about the reward. It seemed like the boss was tired of waiting for him, so the guy asked him to show what he was capable of. Accepting the challenge with gusto, the Scorpion champion was the first to charge, swinging his blade. Raoul instantly held his sword out in front of him to take the enemy's blow. He then tried to break the distance, but the keeper quickly closed it, intending to attack. They began to furiously exchange blows, not yielding to each other in defense or speed. The observers realized that this monster was a strong opponent, and D-rank guardians were not so easy to defeat. Josh offered to help the young master, but Jake was sure that the master had an undeniable advantage. Against the sword, claws, and poisonous sting of the guardian, he used only the sword from the very beginning. This means that he behaves quite relaxed and at ease, thoroughly enjoying the battle. Raoul had already forgotten this feeling, but now he could take a break from training, solving problems, and managing the guild. Now he could only focus on the battle, but all good things must come to an end. Raoul is a busy man, so he decided to move on to the next step, after which he began filling the sword with mana. He had fun, but unfortunately he doesn't have much time to mess around with it for too long. It was decided to wrap things up, but the keeper only smirked, looking at the guy's smug face. The boss immediately decided to bring the guy down to earth, after which he began to release poison from his sting. As Raoul dodged, he noticed how the poison burned into the ground, so he had to be careful. At that very second, the keeper closed the distance, intending to attack the guy, but then managed to defend himself. As their blades clashed, a shockwave was created that reached the knights who were standing quite far away. Everyone was surprised that the monster was able to control the mana sword, and Josh still offered to help the master because the situation was critical. However, the knights dissuaded him from this undertaking, since they would only distract him and thereby harm him. They can only believe in him because the master had previously told them that he would deal with this problem himself. Raoul, when I was on the verge between life and death, experiencing constant tension, so now he was ready to squeeze everything out of him because he was dealing with the Crusher, a great solo player. Although he is also a strong opponent and understands when it is better to use the Sword of Mana and when to use ranged attacks. He was strong and agile, but his movements were too monotonous and sweeping. This was his weak point, and when Raoul rushed at him, he tried to figure out what the monster would use this time. When he got as close as possible, he realized that it would be a claw, and so he immediately dodged it. The keeper didn't like this, but the guy sped up even faster and was able to cut off its sting. While the monster was writhing in pain, Raoul, without wasting time, carried out the final attack, cutting through the guardian's body. The boy thanked him, as he was pleased to remember the old days full of battles. The knights noticed that the master had become stronger again. He had recently become an expert, but had already reached the intermediate level. It's only a matter of time before the master surpasses Jake in swordsmanship. Unable to bear such a statement, the knight demanded that the master quickly go to the other gate, securing the next guardian for himself. Suddenly, a notification appeared that the Bear Strike skill had reached the intermediate level of level 4, and Raoul had received the Knight class. After that, he apologized to his comrades for making them wait because they were probably bored just watching. However, Josh, delighted by his fight, said that it was amazing and he couldn't take his eyes off it. Philip also praised him, but they were a little behind schedule, so they had to head to the next gate. He had said earlier that they had a long day ahead of them, so they had to prepare for the next fight. They cleared the gates non-stop for 7 hours, after which they were able to close the 4th D-rank gate. And the mercenary units, having regained their strength, headed to the E-rank gates and successfully completed the mission. Thus, all the gates on the capital's territory were cleared. On the first day, about 500 people died, and about 700 were saved. Many thought that all the horrors were behind them, but Raoul knew that this was only a warm-up before the real war. Sometime later, people were discussing the gate, and some even saw orcs coming out of it. They also watched the mercenaries and knights, who probably knew about the invasion and were ready to fight back. They are said to belong to the glorious county of Ashton, and to be commanded by the Earl's youngest son, a rather young fellow. While everyone was discussing Raoul's exploits, the guy himself was very tired, and so Bernard took care of his rest. Meanwhile, at the Rindle County seat, the man sitting on the throne was reading a newspaper with an angry expression. Having eliminated the danger in the capital of Turim, the noble Ashton military family has marked its return. Many wondered who this Raoul Ashton was, whom the residents of Turim had dubbed the new hero. Such a big leap forward could bring Ashton County back into the political spotlight, something that has irked Chief Rindell. Throwing the newspaper aside, he realized that all their preparations had gone down the drain and were now pointless. Brian lowered his head in fear, trying to convince his father not to worry about the latest news. However, this angered the man even more, causing him to release the energy outward, thereby pinning his son to the floor. While the boy was kneeling, the man said that by the age of 60, he had 30 sons, and none of them were of any use. Ashton's sons are also getting in the way, ruining all the plans he's been building for so long. Having calmed down, he noticed that Brian could not withstand even a drop of pressure, and still dared to call himself an expert. Hudson then demanded a detailed report of everything that had happened in his absence, while he had gone into secluded training for a month. Brian gathered all his strength before looking at his father's face and tried to find the right words. As it turned out, about 2 weeks ago, the temple sent an official document which the boy immediately handed over to his father. It spoke about the open gates, their number, cleared during the week, and also the number of victims. The knights were afraid to enter the gates, which led to an increase in the number of casualties. But at the moment, all the gates are blocked. Brian didn't understand his father's reaction at first, but a second later, his body successfully broke through the wall of Hudson's office. The boy began to beg him to have mercy, but his father's anger was too strong to leave it unpunished. The Count banished him from his family, and until he was of use to him, he might not even dare to set foot on the county's territory. He didn't care that it was his son. If he saw him, he would kill him on the spot. Then he asked to tell his third son that he was waiting for him. As the man watched his son leave, he mentally cursed the Ashton family, which had angered him. Meanwhile, they heard that he and his knights contributed to the defense of the kingdom, and on top of that, he was such a handsome man. This guy became the first among the juniors to earn a perfect score in the entrance exams, and his knights receive high salaries. Some people thought that people were praising some empty-headed person because they were sure that it was his family that did everything, and not Raoul himself. They didn't care that he had rescued a couple of people from the gate, so they were ready to show everyone that they were better than him. Raoul was already starting to get annoyed by all the attention. He now felt like an animal in a zoo. But at that, he also told Raoul that in the capital, they were trumpeting about him at every step, but the guy was not interested. However, Dalton wanted to know if the rumors were true, because they said that he was the true heir to the earldom of Ashton. Raoul was tense about this statement, but he understood that otherwise no one would have allowed him to take so many soldiers. He asked his interlocutor to stop talking nonsense, since his elder brother would inherit the throne, and he didn't care about that. He also explained to the inquisitive young man that he had formed the knightly order on his own, without the support of his family. Dalton was surprised by this answer, but Raoul added that he had some capital for this. His companion thoughtfully suggested that he might go to the gate with them next time for a little fun. At that very moment, Raoul stopped and looked at Dalton, happily realizing that he had caught one. It may seem like Raoul joined the academy to sneak out of home, but in reality, he has a different goal. He wants to find as many skill books and hidden talents as possible to build a great team. Although Gray's arrival had changed the student roster, he had already selected candidates for recruitment, and one of them was the clingy Dalton, who, contrary to his character, is not a very capable guy. In fact, the most powerful man in the kingdom is the swordmaster, Marquis Templeton. It's nearly impossible to build relationships with high-class NPCs, but Raoul has his perfect opportunity back. At present, the gates are only open to a limited number of people, and official permission must be obtained. There was no way he could have passed through the gate alone. Even though she was an expert, he had no chance to prove himself in battle, so he probably dreams of conquering the gates. And now, Raoul can give him this opportunity. The guy wanted to start with the F-rank gate, because they are quite safe, and Dalton was happy with that. However, he has conditions. Raoul will only take him, no servants or guards. He also wants to keep this foray a secret because he wants to avoid another wave of gossip. The interlocutor agreed and surprised me with his calmness, but it is unclear what he would do if Raoul had bad intentions. However, thirdly, he had to get permission from the Duke, and this was a mandatory part of the agreement. This is quite obvious because suddenly something happens to him and someone needs to be able to resolve the situation if necessary. This is not a pleasure trip, but an official visit. Raoul has a whole squad of knights. He has someone to answer for. So the guy decided to return to this issue as soon as Dalton had spoken with the Duke. But for now, he said goodbye to him. This condition made the guy think about how to convince the old man to let him go, because it was unlikely to be so easy. A little later, Raoul reported on the situation at the academy. The general attention was tiring him, but overall it would do. After all, in essence, this is what he was striving for, and his subordinates must maintain public opinion at the same level. When asked how the troop deployment was going, Bernard replied that over the past 2 days, 100 fighters had been used as bait. They also hired 10 more mercenaries, and in the main unit, 20 active spies completed basic training. There is a war for public opinion. In this fierce battle between the nobles, they are obliged to strengthen their position. So turning to Reuben's voice was the right decision, as they conveyed the information about the gate without asking for anything in return. Anyone who wonders how such influence can be achieved does not know the enormous power that the source of Connect possesses. It is an elite organization made up of mages, and its president is Genis White. He is one of the 3 great mages on the continent, and his competence is almost impossible to dispute. He surpasses in status even those who occupy high positions, and Reuben's voice is the most influential media of all. In battle, it is not necessary to fight only with blades, and they can use absolutely any possibilities. Raoul asked to double the number of mercenaries and to ensure that there were guys in reserve who could hold a conversation. Perhaps Raoul would gladly accept them if he could control the gate, but that is impossible. They will probably try to tarnish his reputation, but he will be left with nothing, because only the chosen one can close the gates. Therefore, he asked his comrades not to disclose this information, because the lords would immediately pretend that they did not care about the gate. By turning their thirst for profit to his advantage, the guy will gather all the warriors of the kingdom. Only in this way will they be able to resist the impending danger that is successfully moving towards them. When night fell, the man ran as fast as he could, as if trying to escape pursuit. He thought they would stop chasing them after the gate opened, but for some reason, they couldn't stop. Now his task is to distract as many degenerates as possible so that his comrades can safely escape. But at that very second, he stopped abruptly, noticing several figures in dark robes in front of him. The mysterious people immediately recognized him as the leader of the information organization Wings of Freedom, Elias the Faceless. The man realized that they had been pursuing the criminal guilds for 6 months already, and this was immediately confirmed. He wondered what had brought them here. It was impossible. He was their next target. At first, they wanted to kill him, but in the end, they decided to make him an offer he would find hard to refuse. They offered him to surrender, since it would be a shame to kill such an important person, and if he joined them, they would spare him. Elias immediately pulled out his dagger and rushed to attack, not wanting to agree to such a stupid proposal. However, the masked man immediately defended himself from the blow, and Elias was shocked to see him wearing power armor. He guessed that they were sent by the Empire, but he didn't think that would actually be the case. The masked man smiled in response to his interesting conclusion, which would definitely cost him his life. However, he left them no other choice, so the rest of the robed warriors rushed forward to kill Elias. He realized that he couldn't cope alone, and so he let them get as close as possible, waiting for them to attack. The attackers were surprised, thinking that he had disappeared using invisibility magic, but in fact, he had used an artifact. Meanwhile, Elias, sitting on the roof, realized that the secret organization that was exterminating guild members was working for the Empire. But now he was interested in only one question. What was going on in this kingdom? Raoul? Jake immediately became indignant, but Philip tried to stop him, wanting to know the details. The guy understood that sooner or later this had to happen, after which he asked about the E and D rank gates. They still had access to them, but the question remained as to who would now be responsible for the F rank gates. However, no one could say anything for sure, since there are currently several different families on the waiting list. Given the low danger level, F-rank gates are ideal for bragging rights, and nobles can also make a good profit from them. Apparently the captain of the guard is also confused, but now is the time to win his trust. The guy asked to contact him at any time if any problems arise, because he is always ready to provide fighters. The man replied that he was a truly noble man and wished that all aristocrats were the same. However, it was his duty to protect the city and its inhabitants, so Raoul proposed that they work together from now on. The man suddenly cleared his throat, because at first he thought that he shouldn't talk about it. But it interested the guy. There are rumors that the Rendell family is behind this, and it is possible that the Ministry of Finance was the initiator. This is only his guess, but many employees of the department have connections with the Randalls, including the minister. The situation was quite strange, so the captain immediately thought that the guy should know about it. Raoul thanked him for the information, after which he realized that there was nothing surprising, since they had expected such an outcome. But Jake thought this was too much, because they were depriving them of their rights. But one way or another, they would have to obey the royal order. Although there was nothing to worry about, since they had lost nothing, the knight did not quite understand the meaning of what was said. Regular soldiers can easily deal with F-rank gates. There is no point in sending mercenaries. They will only waste money. As a result, they will receive mediocre items, and it is better to direct efforts to gates of rank E and above. Those in charge of the F-rank gates will be sent to the suburbs, using this opportunity to clear out the remaining gates. Those who ignore the items won't last long anyway, as keeping the gates under control isn't easy. For now, they will focus on achieving recognition and fame, forget about everything else, and take care of themselves. So Raoul asked them to focus on managing the mercenaries and their personal growth, which everyone immediately agreed to. In a week, the official annual knighting ceremony will take place, where the first guild will show what it's made of. They are required to work hard to attract everyone's attention and to be known even beyond the borders of the kingdom. Meanwhile, several knights stood in front of the gate, asking each other if reinforcements would arrive. However, they were not sure about this and did not know what to do if something terrible happened. They still have to fix the problem because they have no choice but to follow orders from above. But suddenly an army arrived behind them, and one of the knights loudly asked the others to step aside. He demanded passage for the Viscount's fourth son, Asen Carrington, who was riding on horseback. The knight, Bill, approached and saluted him, then introduced himself, adding that he was responsible for controlling the gate. Meanwhile, Asen looked in surprise at the huge portal, which he saw for the first time in his life. Then the guy asked him to get out of the way because his people were blocking the passage. Bill was surprised by such a request, while the Viscount's son gave the order to cross the gate. At that very moment, the knights offered the guy to take care of their horses and leave them in his care. But, to everyone's surprise, Asen swung his leg sharply, hitting Bill right in the face, causing him to fly to the ground. The irritated guy tried to remind him of his place because he dared to ask him to dismount. The knight wanted to explain the situation to him, but he did not want to listen to anything, deciding to talk to his captain. Bill, dissatisfied with the nobleman's behavior, warned him that it was not his fault that the horses would go crazy as soon as they entered there. Asen doesn't know that there is a high concentration of mana on the other side, so horses are forbidden to take with them. Even if he is lucky and survives, he will not escape suffering, and it seems that this night will bring many victims. The guy asked what exactly awaited them behind the gates, to which he heard that only orcs or goblins. However, this arrangement did not suit him, because he thought he could profit from the treasures without entering into battle. If Raoul Ashton hadn't gotten in his way, Asen would have become the hero of the capital, finishing off a couple of monsters. He decided to bring it down to earth by closing the remaining gates, so he gave the order to his soldiers. Marco, an Imperial guardsman, warned him that it could be dangerous and that it would be better to send scouts ahead. However, the guy replied with dissatisfaction that if they gave in to fear, they would not be able to clear the gates. After all, what will people think of them if they can't figure out even such a trifle? But suddenly Marco grabbed his weapon, asking the master to stand behind him, which managed to frighten the nobleman. At that very second, everyone noticed how monsters began to emerge from behind the trees and immediately grabbed their weapons. Asen immediately trembled and was scared, because this was the first time he had encountered monsters face to face. Meanwhile, Marco loudly ordered everyone to remain calm, stay in position, and prepare for battle. After some time, information reached Raoul that the knights had entered the F-rank gate and simply disappeared. Everyone understood that this sounded absurd, All the troops that crossed the gates disappeared into thin air. 10 squads have gone missing in the last couple of days, each of them ordered to clear the gate. The guy suggested that the gates transform and eliminate anyone who enters. But this is only characteristic of high-ranking gates. Perhaps there was something inside that he might have missed. Bernard immediately noticed the confusion on the gentleman's face. Suddenly, the boy ordered him to gather the best knights, including Homer, which surprised his subordinate. When asked why there was such seriousness, Raoul confidently replied that they would carry out a rescue operation. Sometime later, Dalton was desperately fighting the toad monsters while